of Prophet Muhammad SAW. And ladies and gentlemen, another warm greetings to each of you, and thank you to attend the second day of lecture series and workshop on Maqasid methodology. Hopefully you can attend these second sessions, and today's sessions, ladies and gentlemen, inshallah will be held until 12:40 p.m. So hopefully everyone can enjoy and takes much of benefits from this event. And they move to the next agenda. Now we proceed to the presentations, and that will be presented by Professor Dr. Jasser Auda, and also will be guided by Mr. Supriyanto Abdi SAG MCAA as the moderator. So without further ado, I give the stage to Mr. Abdi. The stage is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Distinguished Professor, our special guest, Professor Dr. Jasser Auda, my brother Dr. Addiarahman, and all lecturers of the Faculty of Islamic Studies. Good morning to all of you, and welcome back to our forum. This is our second day of the short course that we are having on Maqasid methodology. And we had our first day yesterday with some general introduction of the Maqasid methodology, and today, in the second day, we'll be continuing by exploring further, I think, some of the most important parts of Maqasid methodology. And some of the materials, the sources on this have been uploaded on the link, so you can also access all those materials. And if you have read some of them, you'll find that there's some important part or chapters of the book that is the main source of the topic today, the Maqasid methodology, and we'll be spending 1 or 2 hours today exploring and elaborating further some important parts of this idea, this concept, Maqasid methodology. And we are very grateful again to have with us today our distinguished guest, Professor Jasser Auda. And I think, even though I don't need to reintroduce you again, but I think I need to re-highlight again some of the important, strategic position that our professor has held in various capacities. So our special guest, Professor Jasser Auda, is currently distinguished professor and Ashatibi chair for Maqasid studies in the International Peace University of South Africa, Cape Town, South Africa, and he is also president of Maqasid Institute Global, whose headquarters is in the USA and has branches in various places around the world, including in Canada, in UK, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, who's the director. Dr. Adi is also with us today, and also in India. And I have heard this morning from Professor, we also Global Maqasid Institute Global also has branches in other places as well, including in Turkey and Sri Lanka, right? And Rome, in Italy. So the branches keep expanding, and that will be like, if you have read some of the books, you will find that the ultimate goal of this project is to actually to establish, the networks of scholars, institutions, and research centers, all working on developing this Maqasid methodology. So that's the current position of our professor, Jasser Auda, and he has served, and I think still serving as a member of various fatwa of fiqh council in various countries in the world, including in Western countries. For example, he is member of European Council for Fatwa and Research in Ireland. He is also member of Fiqh Council of North America in USA. He is fellow of Islamic Fiqh Academy of India in India, and also a member of the Advisory Council, the Fiqh Council of Australia in Australia. Yeah, so with all his credentials and record, we are very grateful to have him here to help us understand and elaborate more this, important idea of project of Maqasid methodology. So that's a sort of introduction just to open up, this, the forum, the session, Professor. And now we can go directly to the main business of our forum today, exploring some important concepts of the Maqasid methodology. And for the first session, I think, for this today forum, today's session, Professor Jasser Auda will be talking about the methodology, so the steps in methodology. So there will be 5 steps in developing Maqasid methodology, and if you have read the books, you will find the picture there, illustrating the cycle of the steps, comprising of 5 steps. So I'll leave this to Professor to elaborate more on this. So without further ado, I'll hand over the floor to Professor Jasser Auda.
شكرا دكتور، شكرا أخي، جزاك الله خير. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أسعد الخلق وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. رضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. When you go to a university and you do graduate studies or advanced studies, you normally take a course on methodology. There are 3 different kinds of methodology that you take in a university. I taught in a number of universities a course that is called methodology, in which you are teaching the students how to do interviews and questionnaires, how to gather information. And methodology would be basically the logistics of research by observation, qualitative versus quantitative, and who said what. This is usually what you study when you study methodology. But methodology is not interviews and questionnaires. Methodology has a higher level of courses. If you go to one of the top universities in the West, for example, if you take a methodology course in Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or University of Toronto, this is not going to be interviews and questionnaires. The methodology course in Harvard or Cambridge is a philosophy course, is a course on the philosophy, the approach. If you are studying economics, you will take a course on the economic philosophy, neo-conservatism, usually these days everywhere, or if you are in a school where still there is leftist leanings, you will take a course on Marx and Marxism. This is methodology because it is the approach. In Arabic, it is المنهج. لكل جعلنا منكم شرعة ومنهاجا. منهج, it is now a مصطلح or a terminology that methodology is منهجية. What is the manhaj? A manhaj is a طريق, is a way, is a road that you take. What are the signposts, the معالم, the أدلة on that طريق? When you teach the students interviews and questionnaires and qualitative and quantitative, you are actually assuming a social sciences methodology. You are not coming from an Islamic perspective. You are usually Durkheimian in your approach. So, and based on Durkheim and the self-identification and the categories of sociology, from the definition of family to the definition of stratas, this is the background. But the students don't know that. They just think that this is now methodology because you are teaching them questionnaires and interviews and so on. If you go to the higher level of teaching methodology, you're not going to do interviews and questionnaires. You're going to say, why are you doing interviews and questionnaires? Let us critique that. We are taking people's opinion. Does people's opinion establish truth? In the Durkheimian world, it does. When you go to a society and tell people, what do you think of whatever it is, government, they don't like the government. It becomes a truth that the government is bad. But the government could be very good, even though people don't like it. But the government is actually trying to do something good. There is an outside criteria by which we judge the politics of a government, by which we judge people, their categories. You go out in the society in the West and you ask people whether they like to be the other gender or not. And you find, 40% of the society doesn't like its gender and wants the other gender. This is not truth from the Islamic perspective. From the Islamic perspective, the right methodology is that establishing a gender of a person has an independent criteria of what the person thinks. As I mentioned yesterday, I could wake up in the morning and think I'm a woman, but I'm not a woman. I will continue to be a man. And a woman wakes up in the morning. Why? Because we judge from an Islamic methodology the gender of a person, man or woman, based on an independent criteria, not based on self-identification. I cannot self-identify to be poor, and I'm not poor, or self-identify to be rich, and I'm not rich, you see. And there is a difference between methodology a la Durkheim and Hegel and all the way to Nietzsche and Foucault. That's what you study if you study methodology in Harvard or whatever. They will teach you these guys in order to make you, whether whatever, depending on the methodology professor, a Kantian or a modernist a la whatever it is, or you go into postmodern philosophies, which is the very dominant philosophies these days. They make you doubt everything in terms of categories and so on. So you study morality, and they make you doubt the concept of morality because they teach you Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, in the origin of morality, whatever his book, he is saying that morality is a fake, is a lie, that the word morality is a lie. And it's just the game of the noble to deceive the poor. So they shape your mind, and you're supposed to be studying ethics. But they give you methodology so that you don't have ethics. You see, you deconstruct ethics, deconstruct, displace, demolish, and so forth. The alternatives of the deconstructionist postmodern philosophy. So when we study methodology and we teach methodology from the Islamic point of view, we have to be very aware of the philosophy we're coming from. Yesterday, we touched on that, on the sources of knowledge, and we touched on what the rest in what you find in chapter 3 here, knowledge, reality, and scholarship. And in this humble book, I preferred to call it knowledge, reality, and scholarship instead of calling it epistemology, metaphysics, ontology, and axiology. Why? Because if I tell you epistemology and axiology and metaphysics, I'm coming from a Greek perspective. I'm coming from a Greek methodology. And the Islamic methodology is different from the Greek methodology. That's why yesterday I told you the difference between metaphysics in the Greek methodology and physics. In Islam, everything is physics. But it's ghaib and shahada that is different. the difference between epistemology and the epistemological questions and knowledge or ilm in Islam. Ilm is different from epistemology. They're, of course, area of intersection from some fundamental questions. But make sure that when you study and teach methodology, you're not coming even from a Greek perspective. Because yes, as Muslim philosophers, we worked on the Greek perspective, but the Quran differs on some fundamental questions. Today, I would like to take you to what they call a meso level of methodology. A meso level, an intermediate level. It is not interviews and questionnaires and very technical issues. And it is also not the philosophy, because hopefully we touched on the philosophy yesterday. It is the meso level of what are the steps I should take if I'm a researcher. These steps are not very technical, but also they are not very philosophical. They are not at the level of the manhaj, but they are a amaliya, a process. So when you have amal, what are the amaliyat? You see, when you add a ya and ta to any word, amal, حداثية, صناعية, ديكارتية, Darwiniya. When you do that, they call it in Arabic مصدر صناعي, which is like adding ISM in English. You make a terminology. So basically, Darwiniya would be Darwinism. Hadathiya would be modernism. So amaliya or amaliyat is processism. Like how do you follow the process of research, of thinking? When you do research or when you supervise your students to do research, so that you are faithful to the Islamic methodology, the Islamic philosophy, and you are not drowning your students or not misguiding your students to a Durkheimian world or a Darwinian world or any of these worlds that people sometimes assume, and then they come to research based on a Nietzschean worldview or a Descartesian worldview or a Kantian worldview, not an Islamic worldview. Now, these methodology are the 5 steps that you see here. And I'm proposing these 5 steps just as, again, this whole book is fiqh, is just a way of understanding. But I'm not claiming that these are the steps necessarily that you take when you do research. These are just guidelines. And I'm not saying that these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in definite steps. You can start from 5 or from 3 or from 2. You can start with the formative principles. And then you say, oh, these principles are not enough. I have to go back to the Quran and Sunnah. And then you say, oh, the Quran and Sunnah, I didn't study them enough to build a framework. Let me go back to the framework. And then say, oh, let me revise my purpose. So I'm going to take you in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, but I don't mean for them to be a definite process. I just mean for this to be guidelines. Start with a purpose. Why do I start with a purpose here and not problem definition? Because if you start with a problem definition, someone else will define the problem for you. But if you start with a purpose, you will define the problem for yourself. I noticed a lot of problem definitions that are not Islamic. I had supervised numerous students in my life and got involved in numerous research. Students come and her problem is patriarchy in the Muslim society. Patriarchy in Turkey. That's her problem. But then I tell her, is patriarchy a problem from the Islamic point of view? How do you define patriarchy? She says, patriarchy is the domination of men, the authority of men. I tell her, okay, but there is authority of men in Islam, not to the extent of injustice, but Allah said, الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men, it's not authority, but it's care, it's responsibility, leadership. Men are leaders of their family by default. Yes, some women are very strong. Most women are very smart, smarter than the men sometimes. Yeah, sure. But at the end, Allah made the men leaders of the family. The father has to be involved in his daughter's marriage almost every Muslim culture. Some Muslim cultures perhaps in the West, not as strong. But even in Western culture, that non-Muslim fathers are also part of that marriage proposal. It's just human, I guess. It's not necessarily wrong, but there are practices that are wrong, and some wilaya are ظلم, are unjust. You see, read Ibn Rushd, for example, his Bidayat al-Mujtahid. So I tell my sister that patriarchy is not a problem. Patriarchy you need to define and divide into Islamic and non-Islamic. And then the non-Islamic would be your problem. So if men in the society oppress women in a particular way, or women are not treated equally in front of the law, for example, and the law is supposed to treat everybody equally, or there is a right that women have that men do not give, that is a problem. That is your Islamic problem. But your Islamic problem cannot be patriarchy. You find economic freedom, economic freedoms in Malaysia or in Egypt or whatever. Economic freedom, how do you define that? You go back to the Economic Freedom Index, you will see that the economic freedom is defined in terms of facilitating the infrastructure for foreign businesses, really, in a way that could harm the local economy. It's not always benign. The Economic Freedom Index is not benign in general, and some of the elements are good. Knowledge economy, the problem is that I had this student back in Qatar. The problem is that Qatar needs to be a knowledge economy. Yeah, but how do you define knowledge economy? And what is that? Is it about the speed of the internet and the intellectual property agreements? And if you go to how they define knowledge economy, for example, in the UN, even the UN, you will find that this is not knowledge economy, this is capitalist economy, and not just capitalist, but international corporate businesses economy. So they tell you that in order to have a higher knowledge economy, you need to have high-speed internet in the country. But people could be illiterate in a country. It's not part of knowledge economy index, whether you have education, basic education or not. Illiteracy, that is the UNDP, that's different. So you could be working towards a knowledge economy like we see in the Arab world, and people are illiterate. That student from Egypt, I told her that, 70% according to government, 65, I think, 66%. According to the government, 66% are illiterate people. They don't read and write. What knowledge economy are you talking about? Fast internet and mobile phones and intellectual property agreements in order to control the pharma industry. Then you are taking the wrong problem for your research. Because as a Muslim, doing research in Islamic university, you cannot be resolving the problem of patriarchy or the intellectual agreements on intellectual property or sexual freedoms. Believe it or not, I had this without mentioning names in all the Islamic universities. And someone wants to research sexual freedoms. What is this? Yeah, sure. I mean, there are some elements of that in Islam, but we don't have a problem of sexual freedoms versus that in Muslim societies. That is not how you frame the problem, how you define the problem. So when you start with a purpose, a maqsid, a maqsood, the purpose will guide you to define the problem properly. What is your purpose? And the purpose of your maqsood has to be compatible or coming from the purposes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His book and the sunnah of His messenger. And when you have the right purpose, so when it comes to, for example, patriarchy and so on, if your purpose is justice in the family, let's say, justice, qist, then how do you define qist in the family? Then men have certain responsibilities and rights, and women have certain responsibilities and rights. And then you go to the family, and we have a problem that women's rights in this area is compromised in the society. There is a problem. Or men's rights, or men's responsibility. Men are not carrying the responsibility. Now you are Islamic. Now you are doing Islamic research because you are taking a haqq, a right, or a wajib, a duty, and you are saying that we have a phenomena in the society that is problematic, and we want to make sure that there is justice in the ummah, in the family. Or when you say fahisha in the society, we have a problem of fahisha. Why? Because my maqsid is al-iffa. Iffa, or chastity, is a maqsid. وَلْيَسْتَعْفِفِ الَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ. Iffa is a Quranic word. And iffa means for the non-married men and women to be clean, to be chaste. And then they get married if they want to get married. And people are not allowed physical relations outside marriage. Men, women, whatever it is, animals, whatever it is, all of it's haram, and all of it is fahisha, right? So you can have a problem because your maqsid is al-iffa fi al-mujtama, the chastity in the society. You have a maqsid of dealing with a phenomena of fahisha, and call it fahisha. Don't call it LGB, XYZ, LM. This is not an Islamic framework, you see, because we don't call fahisha or haram by names. Like we don't say al-khamr. Khamr is haram. We call it khamr. We cannot say, well, we will divide the society according to people what they drink. Some people drink liquor, so L. Some people drink whiskey, it's W. Some people do drugs, it's D. So W, L, D. Are you W or L or D or neutral? And then, no, that's my identity. I'm W. I am someone who drinks whiskey. What is that? This is not an Islamic definition. So when you say people divide themselves in LGBT, now in Canada we have QI plus 2. In Canada now it's like 10 letters. In England it's 24 letters, 24 categories of fahisha. Now, when you do that, you are misdefining the problem. Because the problem is fahisha, yes, and it could be very complex, and it could be psychological, and there could be, it's a complex problem. I'm not simplifying it. But I'm just saying, name it with the right name. Say that we have a fahisha problem, and people, why do men, mostly men really, in the Western societies, we had a research on that in the Fiqh Council of North America, and we found out that 85% of people who change their gender in America are men. They're just men. They don't want to be men anymore. Western civilization, from my perspective, as somebody who is Western too, from my perspective, Western civilization is killing manhood these days. And I have no idea why they do that. I have no idea why the governments of Western countries who come from a Christian value background, even if they're atheists, they're Christians. They built America and Canada and Germany and England. They built these countries based on Christian values. They didn't build Canada because they were gay and stuff. It doesn't build countries like that. Now, 50-60% of the society doesn't know whether they are men or women, you see. And that decision properly. And then we can start to say, okay, what is the problem? Why are men waking up in the morning not believing that they are men? There are many problems. One, the educational systems. There are lobbies. I don't understand how come these lobbies are very strong. I don't know, maybe backed by Russia or something. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea why they confuse the kids like that. In Canada, you find that, babies like kids in schools, alhamdulillah, I don't have kids in schools anymore, but kids in schools, they do exercises with them. Part of it is the educational system. They bring the kid back with a piece of paper. Tomorrow, we're going to have an exercise in the class. You're talking about grade 3 and grade 4. The boys will dress like girls and the girls will dress like boys tomorrow. And then they want the parent to misdress the kid and send him to school as a girl or send her to school as a boy, right? That is one of the problems. Why do we have fahisha in Canada? Is because Canadian educational systems are messing up the kids. They are changing their gender. Like what? It's not even a psychological problem or a simple, it's systematic. The school has a curriculum to make the kids doubt their gender and wake up in the morning and want to be a different gender. And then, are you sure you're a human? Maybe you are a wolf or a monkey, and then they let the kids experience with that. They let the kid identify as a dog or a cat or a snake for a week. And the teacher has to tell him that he is a snake, right? This is crazy. This is not, I mean, from an Islamic point of view, when you define the problem, you cannot say sexual freedoms. You cannot say identity freedoms. Because what identity are you talking? Are you talking about the Islamic identity? Yeah. Yesterday we discussed the Islamic identity, national identity, something different. What are you talking about? Identity as in messing Allah's creation. وَلَأَمْرَنَّهُمْ فَلَوْغَيْرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. You know, خلق Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 3 phenomena these days. One is the change of gender. This is what the shaitan is doing. فَلَأَمْرَنَّهُمْ تكون أذان الأنعام وَلَأَمْرَنَّهُمْ فَلَغَيْرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. Changing of the creation of Allah. One is the gender creation. That is a problem. Gender change. 2 is the cosmetics. Cosmetics. This is لَغَيْرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. People with no need. I mean, if you have a broken nose, you can fix your nose. If you have a skin that has an issue, you can change your skin. Of course, medical. But you cannot wake up in the morning and change your face. I was in an Arab country, without mentioning names, last month, and I walked in a mall, and every single woman in the mall, I'm talking Arab from Arabia, every single woman has her face changed with cosmetics. They remove the eyebrows, they change the nose, they make it European, up like that. They puff their lips with Botox. I'm talking hijabis and like people wearing hijab. Muslims, Muslims from Al-Arab. Every single woman in the mall had an operation. Alhamdulillah, in Indonesia, subhanAllah, it's a much, much more peaceful scene. You can notice some people have operations, but very, very few. But that is a mushkila, that is a problem. فَلَا يُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. So you say, I want to do research on this phenomenon. Why are women changing their faces and removing their teeth and all of that? Like, what is that? Why do we do that? Why do you have your teeth white? Your teeth is fine. But almost every woman in some rich countries, she removes half of her teeth and she puts porcelain so that her teeth are white. And her nose is European. Why? You're Arab, from Quraysh, from Qahtan, Adnan. What is this nose? So this is a mushkila that you can define for years, and then you do your social research in order to solve the mushkila in the society. The third, فَلَوْ غَيْرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ, is genetics. Now, what's called genetic babies. Now, in America and especially in China, now we are starting to change the gender. The gender first, and then now we're changing the color of the eye, and we're changing things. China changes gender to the extent that some cities in China, men are double the population of women. Why? Because people can choose the gender, and unfortunately they choose boys. I'm not sure why they choose boys. I mean, I had boys and girls. I think girls are better than boys, but anyway. Yeah, I don't know. They are nicer to raise, I think. I don't know, easier. But anyway, so no, they choose boys. And because these cities, I wrote about them in one of the research I wrote, because of men much more than women in these provinces in China, there is more crime, there is more homosexuality, there is more everything. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wisdom to balance us. 50% men, 50% women, 49%, 52%. Khalas. But not 70% men and 30% women. And the marriage gifts or the bride gift is very high, and men are stealing in order to pay the mahr. That's in some provinces in China, because now these operations are allowed. And people, فَلَا يُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Al-ifsad, if you follow the Quran, you will find that al-fasad fil ard has about 20-25 kind of madahir or phenomena. All of them are fasad fil ard. Murder is fasad fil ard. Taghut, tyranny, is fasad fil ard. Taqti' al-arham, cutting the ties of the rahim of the relatives, that is fasad fil ard. So if you want a mushkila to do your research on, look at al-fasad fil ard in the Quran and define the mushkila from an Islamic point of view. Do not define the mushkila based on a philosophy or a methodology that is not Islamic. Don't define the mushkila based on a different society that is not our Islamic society, or a different worldview, or a different family, or a different... Don't define the mushkila or misdefine. That is why the first point here is purpose. The second point, after you define the problem, go to the Quran and Sunnah, and of course you go to the Quran and Sunnah also to define the problem. But after you have now a problem, let's go to the Quran and Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and see what can the Quran tell us about the problem. And it depends on how you read the Book of Allah. You see, we have developed a culture of reading the Quran in a very non-applied way. We don't apply. We don't think about the Quran this way. And when I say this in lectures sometimes, I get feedback from some of the participants. They tell me, well, I have been a psychologist, I have been a lawyer, I have been a historian for all my life. But as a historian, I never read the Quran to look for history. And I tell him, well, the Quran is full of history. The Quran is a huge history lesson. It's not a history book. It doesn't have AD and BC and dynasties. It doesn't have names even of the pharaoh but it has a lot of history. I am a political scientist, and I have never read the Quran as a political scientist. I tell him, well, the Quran is a lot of politics. It has a state and the people and the just governor and the bad governor and the Fir'aun. And there's a lot of that in the Quran. I'm a psychologist. I have never read the Quran for psychology. Well, there is a lot of psychology in the Quran. It's not a psychology book. It doesn't identify kinds of trauma or any of that, but it's full of psychology. It is not an economics book, but it's full of economics. But I thought Quran doesn't have economics. No, it's because you did not read it for economics. You will read it for finances. You are reading halal al-bay' wa riba, or trade, and this, and murabaha and mudaraba. But you are not looking for the definition of money, the macroeconomics. Definition of money, definition of trade. What does it mean? What is iqtisad in Islam? If this is now a science, how do we build that science from an Islamic perspective? So when I ask you to read the Quran and the Sunnah, I'm not asking you to give fatwa. Well, if you are from the takhassus of Sharia, of course, you read the Quran for your takhassus. Family law, there is a lot of family law. Criminal law, there is a lot of criminal law. But we have read the Quran as an ummah for fiqh, as in takhassus, jurisprudence, only for fiqh, for the past several centuries. We have not been reading the Quran for sciences for maybe half a century, half a millennium, 500 years or 400, since the time of Andalusia and Bayt al-Hikmah in Iraq and the civilization in Java and world and the Al-Jawi. You had a civilization here where you had sciences developing based on Islam and trade developing and industry, صناعة developing based on Islam, based on Islamic worldview. But we have not read the Quran like that for a long time. Bayt al-Hikmah in Baghdad, as I mentioned yesterday, they studied the animals and anatomy and the sky and the moon and the sun, and they studied everything. So read the Quran, but don't look for fiqh if you are not a faqih. If you are not someone who studies jurisprudence, you're not asked to be a jurist. You are an architect. So look in the Quran for architecture. Look for architectural models. And you will be surprised when I researched this in the past few years, maybe the past decade, I've been researching people who take an Islamic perspective, architecture, psychology, you name it. I found lots of books. I found lots of brilliant, not many, but a few brilliant Muslim architects who say, no, there is an Islamic model, Islamic theory for architecture, different from the French modernism theory. And then they start to theorize on how to build buildings and cities and what is calligraphy in the Islamic architecture. According to, what's his name, the Corbusier, the French guy, writing on the wall is the primitive and the savage people. Only the savage people write on the wall, right? According to Islam, no, only the civilized people write on the wall. You write on the wall because there is a meaning that you want to ادخلوها بسلام آمنين, you know. فلولا إذ دخلت جنتك قلت ما شاء الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان. You write something, and I have a student in Cairo who is actually researching this, writing on the walls. I think in Turkish societies, she's researching Istanbul, writing on the walls in Istanbul how it impacted societies. Because when you write something on the wall, it impacts people. People read. We are iqra, we are a reading society, right? That is different architecture. I have a student in the Maqasid Institute who is background in military sciences. And he said he never read the Quran as a military scientist or a military strategist. But when he started to read the Quran with those eyes, he realized that there are ideas much better than the ideas he learned as a military scientist in Britain. I guess he learned in the UK. But when he looked at war in the Quran, and he is a specialist, he is a war guy, he's an army guy. So when he looks at the Quran for strategies, for what to do in a war, maybe I study jurisprudence, fiqh. So I pass on the story of Talut and Jalut, and I don't understand. But he, as a military guy, he says, well, Talut here did something, military speaking. So when you start to look at the book of Allah this way, you will start to find a different theory of education, for example. There is a lot of tarbiyah, a lot of education. Even our fuqaha, this is not new. Al-Shatibi wrote about tarbiyah and Al-Juwayni. Why do we copy from Maslow and from, what's it called, the cognitive school? And why do we do that? Even though, yes, there are some intersections, and we could say that there are intersections and there is dialogue between civilization. This is nice. But when you theorize and when you take an Islamic methodology to education, you have to be genuine, because we have a very different paradigm for education as Muslims. And our theory of education, our philosophy of education, has to be a genuine Islamic philosophy of education. The Quran, and then the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's the next section. The Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is complicated. Not because he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was complicated. He was very clear. He بيان وأنزلنا إليك الذكرى لتبين الناس ما نزل إليهم. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a bayan, is an illustration. But his sunnah is narrated to us through a hadith. And that's when it becomes complicated, because people are usually not capable of dealing with hadith. You are an education person, you're a military scientist, you are an architect. You don't know whether the hadith is sahih or da'if. And if you Google, you will find the top pages telling you that are based on one particular school. But if you go deeper, you will find different schools and different hadith and different everything. Google is not a measure, because what comes up on Google is the funded, sponsored. And if it's not sponsored directly, it's sponsored indirectly. Sponsored, they give Facebook money and Facebook pumps the page, or Twitter or any of that. You have a campaign and you raise your profile on Google. So when you say hadith, you will find that the first 10 pages of Google telling you it's a hadith da'if. But then you dig further, you find that sahaha fulan, sahaha ullan. Like, it's not da'if. There's so many people who said it's sahih. So sunnah is complicated this way. I suggest, if you are not a specialist, that you look for someone who did the research. Look for someone who wrote PhD on animals in the sunnah, and you will find him putting all the hadith about animals. But don't dig yourself in Bukhari and Muslim and Ibn Majah and Muwatta and so on, because this is huge. This is hundreds of thousands of hadith and narrations, and it's an ocean, and it's a big deal. And you will get lost, and you might misquote. But if you find someone who did research, a PhD on, animals in the Sunnah, family in the Sunnah, teachers in the Sunnah, tijara. So then you could start perhaps to know a little bit about the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. There is a hadith that I believe is sahih, but most of the scholars said that it is da'if, because it was narrated originally by Shia in their books. إذا جاءكم عني شيئا فاعرضوه على كتاب الله. حديث عرض الحديث على كتاب الله. What is عرض الحديث? It is, عرض is expose or to subject. So the hadith is saying, if you hear something about me, subject it to the book of Allah. Look at the book of Allah. فإن وافق ما قلته, if it is according to what I said, and if it doesn't, it contradicts with the book of Allah, then do not take the hadith. Not just the Shia, it's the Shia and the Ibadis and the Mu'tazilis. Everybody except for Ahl al-Hadith, means what's called the Sunnah al-Jama'ah. They didn't narrate it, or the narrator considered it weak. But the others who are not related to each other, you see, when you have a hadith that is authenticated by the Ibadiyya in their line, and the Ja'fariyya and the Zaydiyya, and you find that the Mu'tazila are talking about it, and you find these are different people, and they are enemies, really. They are not copying from each other or anything. That yuqawwi al-hadith. And then what is called ma'na al-hadith. Is there something that is, when we hear, we look at the book of Allah? Yes, there is. In the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we have a number of examples. Aisha radiallahu anha, al-Zarkashi, wrote a whole book. He called it al-Ijaba or al-Isaba. Al-Ijaba. فيما استدركته عائشة على الصحابة. The answer on what Aisha corrected the Sahaba in. How did she correct the Sahaba? By going back to the book of Allah. And he mentioned dozens of ahadith in which a Sahabi radiallahu anhu narrates a hadith. And then Aisha says, no, the hadith is not like that. Because the book of Allah is saying this, and then she gives an alternative narration. It is important that the hadith does not contradict with the Quran. Whether hadith al-ard is correct, whether hadith al-ard is correct or not. The hadith is not supposed to go against the Quran. Allah is saying, لا إكراه في الدين, no compulsion in religion. And then the hadith says, إكراه في الدين. No, that doesn't work. There is something wrong here. The Quran is saying, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. No soul should carry a burden of another soul. And then you find a narration saying, no, you carry the burden, but I am not guilty, but you carry the burden. No, but this is not right. Aisha radiallahu anha had done that. For example, hadith al-tiyara, I'll give you a few hadith. I know most of you are not specialists, but just to give you an example of what we are talking about, because sometimes, because of the way the hadith are narrated, we defeat the purpose. We go against the principles of the Quran. Hadith al-tiyara, for example. Al-tiyara is التشاؤم. الطيرة is a bad omen, bad luck. حديث أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه, he mentioned, قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, الطيرة في المرأة والدابة والدار. Your bad luck is because of your woman and your mount, your animal, and your house. So if someone has a bad luck, whom he should blame? He should blame his wife or his animal or his house. Aisha radiallahu anha, Sahabi too. In fact, Aisha is heavier as a Sahabi than Abi Huraira. Abi Huraira is a great Sahabi and a great narrator, but Aisha is al-Mu'mineen. She married him for, So Aisha said, ما كان الحديث على هذا. This is not how the hadith was. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was saying, لعن الله بني إسرائيل. May Allah curse those in the children of Israel. Who said, الطيرة في المرأة والدابة والدار. In another narration, it says, كان أهل الجاهلية يقولون. People in the days of Jahiliyyah used to say, if you have bad luck, it's your woman or your mount or your house. فدخل أبو هريرة فسمع آخر الحديث ولم يسمع أوله. He came in, he heard the second part of the hadith and he did not hear the first part. Can Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu misnarrate a hadith? Yes, he can. And if he cannot, then Aisha is misnarrating the hadith. It's one of them is wrong. وقد قال تعالى ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. وفي الحديث قد قال تعالى ما أصاب مصيبة في الأرض ولا في أنفسكم إلا في كتاب من قبل أن نبرأها. She went to the Quran. She said, well, if you don't believe me, read the Quran. The Quran is not saying that when you have an accident, you go and blame your house or your wife or you blame your animal. It is not your animal. It is the accident. It just happened. And then there is another hadith, لا طيرة في الإسلام. No bad luck in Islam. وكان صلى الله عليه وسلم يعجبه الفأل الحسن. There is good luck, but there is no bad luck. You see something, you see a bright morning, the sun is out, you say, oh, it's a good day. We have this in Islam. But you see rain, you say it's a bad day. No, we don't have this in Islam. You see, in Islam we have good luck, good omen, but we don't have bad omen. لا طيرة. وكان صلى الله عليه وسلم يعجبه الفأل الحسن. Also hadith in Sahih and Aisha رضي الله عنها narrating it anyway. So we have to do this ard, hadith, another hadith, again, was Abdullah ibn Umar or Abi Hurairah? I think Abi Hurairah in this hadith. ولد الزنا شر الثلاثة. The son of adultery is the worst of the three. He is worse than his parents. So, again, Aisha was told, is this something that the Prophet ﷺ said? She said, ما كان الحديث على هذا. Hadith was not like that. كان رجل يؤذي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. There was a man who was saying poetry about the Prophet ﷺ, against the Prophet, and he was harming him. He said, من يعذرني من فلان. Who could protect me? Who could help me? Stop this man from what he is saying. فقالوا يا رسول الله إنه مع ما به ولد زنا. Oh Messenger of Allah, he is also a son of zina. He was, defaming the Prophet, and he was also a son of zina. He said, إنه شر الثلاثة. He is worse than his parents. His parents committed zina, but he is harming the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he is worse than his parents. إنه شر الثلاثة. Then she said, ولا تزر وقد قال تعالى ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. No soul should carry a burden of another soul. The kid came from adultery. but he has no blame in adultery. He has nothing to do with this. He is supposed to be normal. He is not worse than his parents. And I know that in our schools of fiqh, they make this kid like they can't lead the prayer, cannot inherit, and it's law in a number of Muslim countries. And that is wrong. That is against Hadith Aisha. And then they say, well, it's Hadith, I think Abu Hurairah. But ya akhi, Aisha is also a Sahabi, and she is saying that the Hadith is not correct. So my point is that you cannot get into a social issue or an environmental issue, whatever issue, and then you take from the Sunnah, you misquote from the Sunnah because you don't have the fiqh of Hadith. The fiqh of Hadith is very important. If you find that Hadith is funny, you have to go and research because sometimes there is something wrong here. This is not Islamic, you see. If you have the general, and then you go and research, you will find that people, scholars of Hadith will basically correct each other. Mentioning men and women, the Hadith of that a woman is created from the rib of the man. And then the Hadith itself is da'if. No scholar of Hadith approved that. But then they tell you, well, it's in Surah Nisa. Surah Nisa is not saying that. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. O you people, اتقوا ربكم, fear Allah, beware of Allah, الذي خلقكم, He created you, من نفس واحدة, from one soul. نفس واحدة, من نفس واحدة, from one soul. وخلق منها زوجها, and He created from her, منها, not منه. He said منها. Muhammad Abdu talked about that in his tafsir. He said لم يقل منه بل قال منها, من النفس يعني وليس من آدم. There is a difference from when he says من نفس واحدة or he says من آدم. He didn't say Adam. He said خلقكم, created all of you, من نفس واحدة, from one soul. وخلق منها زوجها, and He created from her, from النفس. زوجها, the mate, her mate. Muhammad Abdu said, well, if someone is created first, according to that ayah, it is Hawa, not Adam. If you want to understand, this is Arabic, it's clear. But sometimes we misread the ayah because we have a hadith in mind. But the hadith is da'if. The hadith of that Adam slept and he woke up and he found the rib missing and he found a woman, who are you? I am created for. This is Torah. This is the week of creation in the Torah. If you're familiar with the Bible, this is a translation of the Bible. As simple as that. It's not Israeliyat, yani. Israeliyat. So, and then they why do they do that? Because she is created from the rib and therefore she's crooked and that all of these hadith are not correct and they're against the Quran. And then the rest would say ولولا حواء ما خانت امرأة زوجها الدهر. Because Hawa betrayed Adam, khiyana, betraying Adam, women betray their husband. Betray Adam in what? What is this is very, like, for those who have a sense of the Bible and the biblical studies, this is very Toratian, yani. Taurati khalas, yani. But anyway, she did not give Adam the apple. This is the Bible. This is not Islam. وعصى آدم ربه فغوى. آدم وسوس إليه الشيطان قال يا آدم هل أدلك على شجرة الخلد وملك لا يبلى. Oh Adam, I give you شجرة الخلد. He never said Hawa in the Quran. But once he said that both of them فأكلا منها فبدت لهما سوءة, سورة الأعراف. فأكلا منها, they both ate from it. But everywhere else in the Quran, it is Adam. فوسوس إليه الشيطان قال يا آدم هل أدلك على شجرة الخلد وملك لا يبلى فأكل منها. And in البقرة فلا تقربا هذه الشجرة فكون من الخاسرين فوسوس إليه الشيطان ليبدي لهما ما وري عنهما من سوءتهما. That's الأعراف again. in البقرة in البقرة and الأعراف exactly. فأسس 40 from the time of وإذ قال ربك الملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة, and then قصة آدم, and then يا بني إسرائيل اذكروا نعمتي. That is clear in the Quran. We don't have the story of that, but then you find some ahadith blaming Hawa and saying that that is why Hawa is praying at the end of the masjid. And that is why in Hadith ibn Mas'ud of the same stories, فَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِنَّ الْحَيْضَةِ, and that is why they have their period as a punishment. But period is not a punishment in Islam. This is not the Islamic worldview. You see, it's in the Hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, and some people authenticate it. But in the other Hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha during the Hajj of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she cried when she had her period, and he said, what happened? He said, ذَاكَ شَيْءٌ كَتَبَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى بَنَاتِ آدَمَ. This is something Allah كتب, يعني decided or ordained or judged for the daughters of Adam. Why? Why do women have their natural cycle? Obviously for birth and children, and it's not a punishment from Allah or any of that. Yes, it is hard and so on, and that's why they don't fast, they don't pray, We have an ahkam for that. But it's not a punishment. This is Israeliyat. So when you study a social issue or so, and maybe you're not a specialist in hadith, be careful with quoting the sunnah, because sometimes the hadith are not correct. And if you go to the heavyweight scholars of hadith, you will find that they are actually very balanced. It's not the popular opinion. Like for example, hadith al-Dul'a, if you go to Nasr al-Din al-Albani, he's saying it's da'if. If you go to al-Arnaut, Shu'aib al-Arnaut, if you go to Mu'asirun, even Ahl Hadith al-Mu'asirun, you will find that they don't accept that hadith. You see, but some people, they go like, they insist on that because they have a problem. They don't want to be critical. The second step is the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, with this in mind. And the third step is building the framework. So perhaps we can stop here and then come back to the framework, because the framework is also in the next chapter. And there are a number of issues about the mujtahid and the language and so on, and other issues. Perhaps we'll stop so we have a discussion, inshallah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Jasser Auda, for a very long elaboration on the 5 steps of methodology, Maqasid methodology. So he's been talking for, I think, almost 55 minutes, Professor. It's been a long talk. And it's still, we have still 2 steps covered in his talks, and we still have a few more steps to be discussed later on. But I think we could stop for now until this step, the cycle of reflection, and then we continue later on with more steps in the next session. And on the schedule, we will have a break, I think, on 9:45 something, and then, but we can have like 5 minutes for discussion or elaboration if you like, or if Dr. Aldi would also like to add. In the end of the session. Okay. So, all right. Well, I can give 1 or 2, questions from the floor, if any. So, Professor, okay, I've got a question from Dr. Nurkhalis, and another one from, yeah? Oh, Pak Priyonggo, Pak Priyonggo, okay. And you also, we have 3 then, okay. Dr. Nurkhalis, Pak Priyonggo, and the last one from my website. Okay, so we can start with Dr. Nurkhalis.
Thank you very much. Very insightful explanation regarding step of Maqasid methodology. My first question regarding the current economic practice, especially regarding interest and also riba. Relate with the purpose of economic transaction and economic activities in Islamic perspective, of course. According to Professor Jasser, about the verse in Quran, innamal bay'u mithlu riba, ahallallahu al-bay'a wa harrama riba. Like buy and sell, like similar with the riba, but Allah ahallallahu al-bay' wa harrama riba. In this context, in the current situation regarding the economic activities especially, because in the conventional transaction mostly based on interest. When we refer to the Quran, because when we look for about the purpose of the Islamic teaching, we have to refer to Quran. Regarding this, what do you think about the interest in the current situation? Is there riba in the current economic system at the time? It is the first. The second about the second about the analogy, maybe analogy between just now Professor Jasser also explained about the merit, etc. About nikah, about etc. My analogy, maybe can we make an analogy, for instance, about the purpose of nikah or marriage in Islam, sakinah, mawaddah, rahmah, sakinah, yeah. And maybe anyone can do something with the woman or etc. by free sex or etc. for getting sexual sex, etc. And can we make some comparison with marriage and free sex with the riba as harmful and bay as the lawful? Yeah. Can we make some comparison, analogy? Yeah. Marriage and zina, and the riba and bay. Yeah. Can we make a comparison like this? And the last maybe about the position of ijma in the process of Maqasid methodology. What do you think about the consensus of ulama or ijma in the process of Maqasid methodology? Thank you very much.
Wow, these are big questions. I need one lecture for each of them, but I'll be very, very brief, inshallah. يا سيدي وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. My opinion, and it is a minority opinion, I have to say. But it's, you asked me about my opinion, I give you my opinion. As someone who studied this and looked at it and tried to understand. And this is how ilm is. You know, people study and with their background, and they understand something and they judge based on that. So I could be right, I could be wrong, but it's my opinion. I believe that the capitalist system is a riba system, from the core all the way to the transactions. I believe that creating fiat money is a riba operation, is a riba process. Why? Because the current system does not relate the piece of paper to anything. This is, you know, the authority of the state. And therefore, it is not representing anything in the reality. So basically, you are talking about a decision by the central bank to create one trillion, 1 billion, whatever it is, and somebody presses a button, that money goes to the branch banks in the system with riba. So the bank, the branch bank will take from the central bank a loan for an interest, even if it's an Islamic bank. It has to deal with the central bank. And then the loan goes to the public in what they take from the bank in loans. And every time they take a loan, the bank creates money from nothing. So the process of creating money from no value, just with the press of a button, to me is riba. Because if 1 dinar for 2 dinars is riba, then 0 dinar for 2 dinars is also riba. You know, all of a sudden you have 2 trillion in the... Why? Because the money you create is going to take from the pockets of everybody. The more money you create, the less value of the money. And therefore this is bakhs, which is another concept. But you are doing bakhs to sukuk. The piece of paper is not money, it's sak. In Islam, technically speaking, it is a sak. And when I have a sak, you cannot give me a sak of 10 pence, and then tomorrow the sak is worth only 9 pence. It's supposed to be 10. And then the day after it is 8 pence. And then after 100 years, it is 95% gone. The dollar, over the past 100 years, lost 95% of its value. If you have a dollar, now you need 95 times in order to buy anything. That is a problem at the core of it. Now, how to deal with it is a big question that does not have a simple answer. I believe that we need to work on 3 strategies. One of them is to try to avoid the worst of the riba, which is what we try to do now with Islamic financing. And I think this is one of the solutions. One of the solutions is at least the average Muslim who wants to think simply. They don't want to think about central bank or international relations or any of that. They just want to borrow something. When he borrows from his friend or from the bank 1,000, they want to go back and give him. So the Islamic finances has 2 categories. One of it is hila, tahayyul, which is التورق والمرابحة. This is hila. This is not really, this is not sharing the risk. This is, I go to the Islamic bank, I want to buy a car. The Islamic bank will give me 100,000. And then I buy the car. And then before I leave the bank, I give them 120. 100 for 120. This is riba. Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu, said, مال بمال وبينهما حريرة. فهو riba. What is that? It's a piece of silk. He said, give me harira, piece of silk, I borrow from you. And then you buy it from me for 100. And then I buy it from you for 120. That is the simple tawarruq. And then you tell me, oh, you owe me the harira, so here's your harira back. So 100 for 120. So Ibn Abbas, when he saw that, he said, malum bimal, this is money for money, which is the definition of riba. Dinarun bidinarain, in the hadith. Malum bimal, wa baynahuma harira. The silk is just running between both companies. They're not selling silk. The bank does not sell cars. The Islamic bank does not sell cars or houses. The Islamic bank is a broker and a lender. So I believe that this is the first step of trying to deal with the capitalist economy, is to encourage Islamic financing. Now, with Islamic financing, we should try to start to move from murabaha and tawarruq especially to mudaraba and qirad. Because mudaraba and qirad is the right Islamic bay'ah. Halallahu al-bay'ah wa harrama al-riba. Riba is increase. Bay'ah is something for something different. I give you a piece of paper and you give me a pen. Or I give you paper and give me money. And then, but not money for money. Money for money is riba. So the first step is to use the Islamic banking as a tool to move from purely capitalist, kind of purely riba-based transactions into more mudaraba and qirad, as in the Islamic banking should participate in business, should do business and take risks. And even if you lose, what's called bunuk al-tanmiyah, the development banks, they go into the business and they partner with you when they give you a loan. That is Islamic. But if they give you a loan and then they, at the end of the day, they take from the back 100 for 120, that is riba, you see. So one step, so Islamic finance is important, is the first step to deal with the capitalist system, but to try to move towards mudaraba and qirad. The second step is to try to start alternatives, to restructure the current economics. It's going to be very challenging because this is going to be a very rough battle. When the countries in this part of the world started to stand on your feet back in the 90s, they hit you. The capitalist economy hit back. And these economies paid a heavy price. The tigers, if you read about that. Why? Because you started to challenge the system. You started to say, okay, let us have our own currency, and no, this is not. So so white supremacy is not going to allow for the system to change very simply. So we need to be sophisticated about how can we start to change. Some countries like Russia, they're starting to gather gold, and they're starting to work with gold. You see, some other countries are thinking about digital currencies. The Turks and some of the Arabs. And how can we break the cycle of the economy by cryptocurrency and so on? That is also another way of restructuring the system. Some other people are thinking of alternative ways of doing that, trying to break from the dollar, trying to tie the dollar to anything, or to tie the currencies. Some of the Arabs are thinking about that, breaking of the dollar from the dollar and selling oil in yen and stuff. That is going to be big, even though they are, they have other policies that are bad. But this policy is very good and very useful because you have to start to restructure the capitalist system. The third alternative strategy is to create alternative economies. And the alternative economy in Islam is al-awqaf. Al-awqaf is infaq, is charity. وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ. The basic transaction in the Islamic economy is not tijara, is awqaf actually. And if you read about the high points of our history in the capitals of Islam, you will find that at the high points of our civilization, al-awqaf was the majority of the economy. The majority of education and hospitals and markets and relief are awqaf. So education was not a business. Education was awqaf. So you donate to the awqaf. Where do you get the money from? From tijara, yes. But the awqaf were protecting the basic needs of the society. Al-awqaf were protecting the hospitals, right? Today, the poor cannot go to the hospital, and the rich can find the cure. And of course, the international agreements and the pharma industry is very vicious. They're not going to allow that to change easily. But if you start to build hospitals that are awqaf, you will start to change the system. Because the hospitals that are awqaf are not trading in life and death. But hospitals, the current system today is trading in life and death. So, I'm sorry, it's a long answer, but basically, how to change that? Yes, it is a riba economy. How to change it in these strategies, parallel lines. And we have to work in these parallel lines. We cannot go to the desert, or now here, the jungle, and just trade in silver and gold. We cannot do that. We have to live. We have to trade in rupees and dollars and so on. But we also have to have multiple strategies, and we have to start to grow our own economics. that is based on charity, our own economics that's based on trade, clean trade, fair trade. That is important. Otherwise, if we as Muslims continue to trade in money, then we are no different from the others. Can we compare النكاح والزنا with بيع and riba? It's the same thing, yes. But أحل الله البيع وحرم الربا, أحل الله النكاح وحرم الزنا. It's the same comparison. But it is easier perhaps to change zina in the society because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His Sharia made al-nikah easy. We complicate it sometimes in our cultures, different cultures. The Arabs are horrible when it comes to that. Al-mahr, parties for 3 days or 7 days, and the girls, according to nationality now, they have their mahr. The mahr of the Qatari is higher than the mahr of the Saudi and the Yemeni. And that is jahiliyyah. That is not. The mahr has to be easy, and marriage is just agreement and shuhud and khalas. So we have to change the culture of marriage so that our kids don't involve in zina. As young as they are, if they want to get married, get married. Not kids, of course, they have to be responsible, but they get married, 16, 18, whatever. But basically, we need to change that culture so that we have a culture of marriage rather than a culture of zina. Even if this means that we have divorces, because the Sahaba radiallahu anhum had multiple marriage and multiple divorces, but they never fall in zina. Zina was a big deal. But today, we insist that the child marries for life, which is excellent. People who do that are very good and excellent people. But the price cannot be that the children fall in zina. This is wrong, haram. We have to make them marry when they get married or when they want to be married. Ijma', I have a problem with that. I have a problem. I believe that ijma' is from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. لا تجتمع أمتي على ضلالة. إجماع الأمة. I don't believe in إجماع العلماء. Which علماء? And how did you measure that? Or إجماع الصحابة. Which صحابة? And how do you measure that? Or إجماع الفقهاء وإجماع أهل البيت وإجماع أهل المدينة وإجماع أهل العصر والإجماع السكوتي والإجماع. So I have a book of mine called Maqasid al-Sharia as Philosophy of Islamic Law, where I counted 62 definitions of إجماع. So our Shaykh, rahimahullah, Shaykh Qaradawi, used to say, there is no إجماع on the definition of إجماع. كان يقول لا ليس هناك إجماع حتى على تعريف الإجماع. كيف يكون في إجماع؟ ما في إجماع على التعريف. So the point is that there is no definition on, but I believe in إجماع الأمة because we have the hadith, and hadith صحيح, لا تجتمع أمتي على ضلالة. That there is no, if the whole ummah of Muhammad says that we fast in Ramadan or we pray for usually what's called the Sunnah al-Amaliyah. طبعا the Quran as Sunnah al-Amaliyah. That is إجماع. But you want to have a difference, خلاف فقهي on issue, and then you say إجماع. There is no إجماع. There is no إجماع on most of the issues. I study fiqh, I write about fiqh every day. I don't see إجماع on any of the khilafi issues. In the Shafi'iyah, when they had the ijma' and so on, واتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوله ما تولى, to me, it's not a dalil for ijma'. This is the dalil for ijma' الأمة, not ijma' العلماء. ومن يشاقق الرسول بعد ما تبين له الهدى واتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين. المؤمنين, all المؤمنين, كل المؤمنين, not just الفقهاء. Because ijma' is quite problematic from my perspective. And then when they say جاحد الإجماع كافر, then you do takfir if someone tells you that there is no, that is quite problematic. And if you do research with a wide scope, you will see that every aspect that is claimed to be ijma' has no ijma'. Read, for example, very useful, read Ibn Hazm, كتاب الإجماع. Ibn Hazm has a book called كتاب الإجماع. Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a book against كتاب الإجماع. And Ibn Taymiyyah proved that every aspect I think 70 examples that Ibn Hazm put in his book have no ijma'. Yeah, Ibn Taymiyyah is saying نقد مراتب الإجماع ونقد الإجماع Ibn Hazm. You will find the two books. It's very interesting when you read Ibn Hazm saying this is ijma', this is ijma', ijma'. For example, إمامة المرأة في الصلاة, that women could lead men in prayer. Ibn Taymiyyah said no, عند الحنابلة تجوز في التراويح وعند الأحناف تجوز في صلاة السنة وعند الشافعية تجوز إذا يعني ده Ibn Taymiyyah was also faqih, يعني very deep. So when he found that Ibn Hazm is making claims of ijma', he's saying no, there is no ijma' for that. And you see, so this is very useful, John. Sorry, very long answer.
Okay, thank you. And I think we can deal a little bit, and so we can continue with Dr. Priyongo if you would like to ask question. I think, yeah, and then after that, turn to the last question. So, Dr. Priyongo.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is my pleasure to meet Prof. Jasser Auda in this forum for me. Then first time I read your books in 2008, Maqasid for the beginner. Right. It's very happy to meet you today, inshallah, to listen what just you present yesterday and today. Let me introduce a little bit my background. Yeah, I'm Priyongo. My background is economics. So I try to relate what you discussed, what you shared with us, to economic methodology. Yeah. Let me bring the concept of Popper. When I got difficulties, how to make Islamic economic to be scientifically acceptable. Yeah. According to paper, there are two requirements that Islam or economic could be said as a science. The first is that the science should be falsifiable, which means could be right, could be wrong. Yeah. And the second step, the science should be verifiable. It could be replicated continuously. If we build the framework and does not meet these two requirements, it cannot be as a scientific. When I wrote some research on Islamic economic and finance, most of the research split between two. Some research focus on developing the concept, taking from the Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, Ijma, and so on, and they does not go to verify this concept itself. On the other side, many research focus on how to verify this concept. They use statistics, they use quantitative method, as well as qualitative method, just to prove the empirical part. My question is how to combine between two. As you just said, in this 5 steps of the concept, according to my opinion, it looks like the discovery process, how to find the framework on the Maqasid framework, right? But I haven't seen how you propose how to verify your concept. How you verify. Should we use such as empirical tools, historical tools, law tool, and so on? What kind of tool that you justify as the Islamic tools? Because I also see that some Muslim scholars try to reject the westernized tools, such as maths, statistics, and econometrics. However, in fact, we still use it. I think it's only my question. Thank you very much, especially for your answer.
MashaAllah. It's a tough question, and I cannot answer you because I'm not a specialist. But I can tell you about the verification that, like, oftentimes there are tools that claim to verify economic equations or economic theories, but they don't really work. Like it's like the theories are not verifiable. Like take take the whole neoliberalist shock creed that, that is produced by the Chicago School, and they try to verify it in South America by applying it to these economies. And every time they fail, they say no, because we have not applied the full theory yet. I think that there is a problem in the economics, and again, I'm not a specialist, but I'm just, as a reader, I can observe there is a gap between theory and the reality. The theory could be very nice, and the curves and the equations could be very chic. But then when you go to the reality, you mess up the reality. They, in the Chicago School, they thought that once they apply the model, everything will be fine. And they destroyed these countries in South America when they did that. So when we propose an Islamic economy, I think I agree with you that we need tools of verification. We try to verify, but I think it's very complex, and we need to think about it. How can we verify? I agree with you that someone like me would be against capitalist economics. I cannot go and borrow the tools of the same economics in order to prove this is a methodological contradiction. Really would not be correct. But because I'm not a specialist, I cannot really tell you how to verify. The science that I studied when I studied sciences was engineering. At the beginning, I studied neurosciences and so on. So if I can speak about the verification in AI, I was a specialist of AI, maybe 35. Yeah.
Just give you a little example. I want to prove one of the ayah in Quran says that yamhaqu riba wa yurbi sadaqat. Right? That our state, that our word growth, the way that we give alms giving, and would reduce any way that we charge interest. Right? 100% I believe to that lemma. Right? The challenge is how to prove it and to be acceptable to the West. Right? So what I can do, I make experiment. I can conduct an interview, maybe to 1,000 people that conducting zakah and not conducting zakah, and we make conclusion based on the statistics, let's say, right? And I could find one paper. However, because we only conducted once, they cannot accept as a science. We need many replication until we find the same solution. And we got this issue. We got this problem, right? Do you have any suggestion? Thank you.
So I was telling you that in the science that I studied, verification, I could speak about verification because I understand the science, because I understand how to verify an intelligent machine. So I could tell you the problems with trying to verify the efficiency of an intelligent machine. But with economics, because I don't understand the science, I cannot tell you. But in terms of the example you mentioned, bear in mind that how you prove depends on how you measure. Like يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَا وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. If you measure only the amount of money in the society, that is not the right measure. But if you measure for example, the impact on the environment, perhaps this could be an additional measure for al-mahq wal-irba. يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَا وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Increase and decrease. So maybe we will decrease because we are harming the environment. Because we did not calculate the cost of our industry on the environment. We think that the cost is zero, but the cost is very high. So we think that we are growing because the GDP is going up. But because the environment is going down, it might be going down much more than the GDP that's going up. So with the riba system, the industry is working, but because we are ruining the environment, we are losing more. So my point is, if you want to measure يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَا ويربي الصدقات, you need to have a comprehensive index, not just the index of the dollars and cents, because dollars and cents, you will go to the model of the GDP and stuff and growth. But if you look at the environment, if you look at the human, because we consume so much, the human is losing their health. The average age is going down because of industry. People, when they lived in the desert or the forest, they have healthier bodies, they have longer life. Well, that is part of the equation of economics, but we don't do that anymore. And we are decreasing in life and decreasing in health. Perhaps you should measure the impact on family and family values. If you come from an Islamic perspective, a good economy is not necessarily good for family. Sometimes some poor nations, they have a very bad economy, but they live well and they live happy and they are simple people and they are fine. You see, so as a non-specialist, my advice is to look at the index in a more complex way and not just measure the material growth, because the material growth, as in money, is not necessarily a good criteria, just an advice. But I don't understand the science, so I cannot help. Jazakallah khair.
All right. Let 2 more minutes left before we have a short break. So the third participant, would you like to go on with the question? And if you could make it short, will be appreciated.
Okay, very short. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Edo. I'm student in here. I'm very happy to meet you, Prof. Jasser Auda, and of course, Bang Adi. Bang Adi aja panggilnya ya. Bang Adi and I both study at postgraduate Islamic University of Indonesia. Okay, let's get straight to the point. I would like to ask if I want to write a dissertation with a title, The Construction of Islamic Banking Practice, which Maqasid theory can I use, especially from the books you have written? Why did I propose the construction title? Because there are still many problem practice in Islamic bank in Indonesia. So I need to deconstruct and propose alternative. An example, the setting of margin still refer to conventional bank interest rate. And then central bank oversight is still problematic. I think that's my question. Thank you.
I did some of this research to look for references in something I was writing recently, so I put in the footnote a number of references. So I'll give you my number, inshallah, we can exchange. I guess the good starting point is 2 points. One, people who are critical of the capitalist economics from within the capitalist economics. There are several people recently who are criticizing the way the capitalist economics work from within. They are non-Muslim, but they are critical of the history of money and how it developed and the inflation and that. And the other point is the criticism of Muslim scholars who are leaders, who were leaders in Islamic finances. I remember our Ustad, rahimahullah, Dr. Jamaluddin Atiyah. He wrote a paper before the end of his life, rahimahullah, on the future of Islamic financing. There are a number of scholars who are like that. Several scholars who contributed to the Islamic finance. Sheikh Qaradawi wrote critically about the shakliya, about the superficiality of some of the Islamic finance. He wrote against the tawarruq. So I can send you, inshallah, a number of papers and books that you can read from the capitalist perspective, people from within criticizing, perhaps give you some new ideas. And from the Islamic finances, scholars who are practicing Islamic financing, but they're trying to criticize in order to improve on it. They were not trying to destroy it. They themselves opened, Bank al-Baraka and the Banuk Islamiyya, yani. But they were critical of themselves. So these are the two starting points. And I advise, if you wish, yani, to use this book as a general framework. It's not coming from an economics perspective or any of that. But as a general framework, it could give you ideas on how to conduct the research, how to follow on the steps. And inshallah, I'll give you my contacts. Contact me anytime. I'm happy to help you, inshallah, anytime.
All right. I think we have and I think it's time for us to have a short break before we continue with the next step. But just to wrap up the session that we have this morning, Professor Jasser Auda was talking about the 5 steps of the Maqasid methodology. It's sort of in the level of, not in the level of philosophy or in technical level, but it's something in between, intermediate level, and it's not to be taken as a definitive step. You could start off with any step, any point, but of course, Professor Jasser Auda was suggesting that the ideal route will be starting from defining the purposes, and then we need to go back to the Quran and find the definition that is provided in the Quran. For example, the fahisha, the fasad, and all definition of purposes that we can find in the Quran as the starting point of this Maqasid methodology. And we'll still continue our conversation on these 5 steps after this, but now I think it's time for us to have a short break. And before that, let's give big applause to our speaker, Professor Abu Sakir. Thank you very much, Professor, for your insightful talk. And now I let everyone to have a short break. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
After this, we talk about composite framework, which is the step 3 anyway. Oh, because this is 7 elements. You will talk 3. No, we talk 3, 4, and 5. Oh. And then 7. Maybe we have for 3 hours by 12:13. Yeah, 12:30.
All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get started our our second session today. But we have very limited time actually. Professor Jasser Auda is supposed to leave around 12 to catch his flight to Kuala Lumpur. Technically, we only have like around 1 hour for our session today. And we still have few important things to elaborate, to discuss. And Professor Jasser Auda need to continue on the steps of Maqasid methodology. So we still have 3 more steps. So we have covered 2 steps, defining the purposes and the cycle of reflection. Then we need to go to the next steps. And Professor Jasser will be elaborating on those steps. And I think he will be speaking about the framework, and he might like to explain the difference between methodology and framework, and then the next step on the critical study on the literature and the reality. Before then, in the end, we develop theories, yeah, and formative theories, principles. So that's the whole step that we'll be covering this session. And then I think in the end of the session, Dr. Adi will also add a few more points to complete the whole issue that we have in our short course. All right. So to make our time more effective, then let's continue our conversation, and by allowing Professor Jasser Auda to continue on his insights, his explanation. So time is yours, Prof.
Jazakallah khair. Barakallahu feekum. If I can have the 7 elements, please. The 7 elements. Inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala rasulil kareem. I wanted to go straight to the framework because there is a difference between the التصور or the perceptualization, which will be described by the framework, and al-ijtihad, the steps that we will take. The steps are based on التصور, but the التصور is different. In English, they say there is a difference between framework and methodology. Methodology has to do with steps, and framework has to do with how do you conceptualize anything, actually. Anything from Islam to reality on the ground. Those 7 elements, I put them this way, but they are not mine. They are everywhere in the Islamic thought and the Islamic fiqh, old and new. They are everywhere in the current research, and they are everywhere in the Quran too. But I tried to put them in a framework so that the researcher would have a guideline. But this is not really like my theory or any of that. It's just I'm summarizing all of them in a framework. There is a lot of talk in our times on Maqasid. And therefore, Maqasid is one of the elements here. In order to have a framework for your research, you have to have a Maqsid, and not just Maqsid, many Maqasid for your research. And you have to think about the Quran. What do you read in the Quran? You read the maqsudat. You read the objectives, the goals. Why is Allah saying that, subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why did the Prophet ﷺ say that? And the whys are going to open this element of maqasid for you. So the maqasid element is very important and is very central. Some of the maqasid of the Quran are methodological maqasid. They are maqasid on the methodology level. One of them is correcting concepts. The Quran is trying to correct our concepts. وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون ألا إنهم هم المفسدون ولكن لا يشعرون. This is islah and this is ifsad. This is bay' and this is riba. This is jawaj and this is zina. This is khair and this is shar. This is adl and this is dhulm. This is hukm and this is taghut. This anything. The Quran is trying to correct our concepts and our conceptual framework. So the first of the maqasid al-manhajiyya, or the methodological maqasid, is the correcting of concepts. And that is also one of the steps that you should follow in order to build your framework so that you can describe the reality well. Related to the concepts are the groups mentioned here, groups, parties, categories, which is how can the concept describe a group of people or a group of creations. Groups, al-fi'at, are not just people. They could be creations, any creations of Allah. Al-ilm, when we understand al-ilm, we can define al-ulama. The problem is that sometimes we separate the definition of the group from the definition of the concept. The concept of fiqh in the Quran should define al-fuqaha. The concept of islah, al-muslihun, al-fasad, al-mufsidun, al-dhulm, al-zalimun, al-sidq, al-sadiqun, and so forth. So when you have the right concept, you can describe the right group and you categorize the group. As I mentioned, the group is not self-identified. We cannot just say that we are reformers. We could be mischievers. We cannot just say that we are whatever it is. We have to have an outside criteria, and that outside criteria is the concept. So revise your conceptual framework. What is money? What is a family? What is an animal? How do you define water? Whatever it is that is going to define your research. And you will be surprised that the fundamental questions are very difficult questions. When you would like to define the human being, for example, and this is at the core of sociology and economics and anthropology and medicine and psychology, the definition of human. How do you define human? You see? And the concept of, of human and defining the category of an-nas, or the people, is very essential in order to build your knowledge on it. When they defined the human in a particular way, in a Freudian way, they built their psychology based on that. In a Darwinian way, they defined the human in a chemical way. The Homo economicus, and then they built on the Homo economicus, whatever it is. So how do you define the human is very important to define the category of people. Now, one of the elements here is universal laws, or as-sunan al-ilahiyya. As-sunan al-ilahiyya is the meta laws of Allah, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe. In قلت استغفروا ربكم إنه كان غفارا يرسل السماء عليكم مدرارا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that Nuh told them, if you do istighfar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring down the rain. ويمددكم بأموال وبنين ويجعل لكم جنات ويجعل لكم أنهارا. And He will make rivers for you and He will give you offspring. This is a law. We can work on the research on proving the law, as our brother is saying in his comment. And it's very important. How can we prove that by istighfar, we are going to have a better resources, better economy, the better rain from the sky? And what is the relationship? And I think the relationship is possible, but we need to research it. You see, when you do istighfar, what are you doing istighfar from? From your mistakes, from your errors, from your shortcomings. So when you discover your shortcomings and you ask Allah to forgive the shortcomings, then you are not going to repeat the shortcomings. And those shortcomings are the ones that make people have a problem in the bigger picture, the picture of the sky and the land and so on. There is a direct relationship. When you study the universal laws of Allah, you have to, it gives you depth in what you do. One of the laws of Allah is diversity. ولا يزالون مختلفين. People will always be different. Not just different colors and tongues and races and tribes, but also different religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that we will always have believers and disbelievers. And we will always have a few believers and the majority are disbelievers. وَمَا أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتَ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. Most people will not believe with you, Muhammad. And most people are not thankful. And most people they don't know. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَهُمْ يَجْهَلُونَ. The majority is not a criteria for good in Islam. The majority is criteria for evil, in fact. Like, whenever the majority goes, it goes for something wrong. But then, that's a law, that's a universal law. But we need to think about it deeply to understand, like, why? What is that? What is the excellence of the minority so that the majority is always wrong and is always disbelievers? وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ بِاللَّهِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ. The most of those who believe in Allah are going to associate other gods with Allah. That is something to think about. So the universal laws are the meta laws, are the laws by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything and makes everything function. And one of the maqasid of Islam and of the Sharia particularly, not to go against the universal laws. We call it مقصد مراعاة السنن الإلهية. You cannot say there is no diversity. Everyone will speak the same language and everyone will have the same religion and everyone. This is not reality. You are going against the universal laws. At some point, the communists wanted everybody to be equal, wear the same, and have the same income. And the extreme communist kind of thinking. And it goes against the universal laws because Allah created us different. And yes, we do have rich and poor. But of course, the poor cannot be hungry and cannot be clothless, and the rich cannot be monopolists and cannot be thieves. Yes, but we have rich and poor. So that is a universal law that Allah created us different this way. And having these kinds of laws in the background of your research informs your research, makes your research more mature. So you don't go against the universal laws of Allah, the Sunan al-Ilahiyya. How do you read the Sunan al-Ilahiyya in the Quran? Sometimes they are mentioned. سنة الله في الذين خلوا من قبل ولن تجد سنة الله تبديلا. كذلك اللهم صل على رسول الله. Sunan. The other ayat where there is sunanullah, right? When you see that, but sometimes sunnat Allah is not mentioned by name. You see it because it's a rule. It's a rule put there. لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. إن تنصروا الله ينصركم. كذلك نجزي المجرمين. You know, there's a sunnah, for example, for those who are criminals. Allah does not punish them right away. There is a sunnah called al-imla. He gives them a space. He gives them a chance to change. وَأُمْلِي لَهُمْ إِنَّ كَيْدِي مَتِينٌ. Al-imla. That is a sunnah. So when you see that people who are tyrants are doing well, like what's happening in Palestine, for example, you know that this is not the end of the road, but this is the sunan of Allah. The sunan of Allah that people, when they become tyrants, He gives them a chance. Maybe they will change. إن أحسنتم أحسنتم لأنفسكم وإن أسأتم فلها. Allah is telling them that in Surah Al-Isra. If you change, then it is good for you. But if you continue, وإن عدتم عدنا وجعلنا جهنم الكافرين حصير. Allah is saying that in Surah Al-Isra to Bani Israel. So there are laws that you can think about sometimes and make you rationalize or understand issues. I'm asked a lot these days, like why what's happening in Palestine is happening. Well, Allah has a wisdom. Why would Allah have a wisdom for people to suffer? Is for the honest people to do jihad for the sake of Allah, for the good to be differentiated from the evil, for the munafiqun to appear and be very clear, those who are now munafiqun, like some of them are very clear, fighting with the enemies. There's munafiqun. And some are less nifaq. For the few ones to be tested. حسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. Another sunnah, the sunnah of fitna, that always people who stand for the truth will have to be tested. Are you honest? Are you true in your standing for the truth? Or you are not true in your standing for the truth? Then this becomes a law. And so forth. So universal laws are very important. Why are those, all of them connected? Is because the universal laws are connected to the maqasid, and the maqasid to the concepts or the mafahim, and the mafahim to the groups. And you have the values. Values are also very important. Why? Because with values, you differentiate three things: the beautiful from the ugly, and you differentiate the righteous or the moral from the immoral, and you differentiate the useful from the harmful. So there are three dimensions, and the three dimensions I built on Faruqi, rahimahullah, Ismail Faruqi, in his work on ethics, in his PhD in morality. So he wrote about the three categories of morality, or good, categories of good or value. One, benefit from harm. What is nafi' and what is dar. وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما, the ithm and the nafi'. And the second would be what is beautiful and what is ugly. What is hasan, jamil, maqbool, mawzoon, and what is qabih, and so forth. And the third would be what is moral and what is immoral. What is khuluq, وإنك على خلق عظيم. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, the highest morals. And what is immoral, which is الشر, الفاحشة, الإثم, and so forth. So the value system is very important. And then there is something called proofs here, which in Arabic al-hujaj, which is when you read the Quran and you look for the proofs for truth. What is the logic of the Quran? When you build your framework, you need to define elements of truth, elements of logic. You need to bring a number of hujaj to you. وَتِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا آتَيْنَاهَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ عَلَى قَوْمِ. Ibrahim, in that discussion, he told them that Allah created the stars and the sun and the moon. What did you create? So he is making a hujjah or a proof by evidence, by giving an evidence and a challenge. That is a proof. Or a proof, al-hujjah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has people who believed in him. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ آمِنُوا كَمَا آمَنَ النَّاسُ قَالُوا أَنُؤْمِنُ كَمَا آمَنَ السُّفَهَاءُ. كَمَا آمَنَ النَّاسُ, because people believed. There is an analogy here, if you wish, hujjatul qiyas, if you want to call it qiyas. There is an analogy between people who believed and people who disbelieved. And I tell them, why don't you become like the people who believed? Right? There are hujaj that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving in his ayat in the Quran for al-haqq. And these hujaj, when you look for, you have to avoid the fallacies. I mentioned in this book some dozen of the fallacies that the Quran is defining so that you don't fall in a fallacy. For example, the fallacy or al-mughalata. In Arabic it's mughalata, but in the Quranic terms would be al-batil or al-kadhib. وَيُجَادُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِالْبَاطِلِ. Batil. What is batil? For example, the fame of the idea. There is a fallacy that the idea that is famous is true. Now, because of the social media and so on, an idea that becomes very famous and has 1 billion views, then it is good. And it could have 1 billion views and it's bad. It's not, you see, it's a fallacy. The fallacy of the fame of the idea. The character assassination. أَمْ أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِنْ هَذَا الَّذِي هُوَ مَهِينٌ وَلَا يَكَادُ يُبِينٌ. When Pharaoh wanted to assassinate Musa's character, He said he doesn't speak well. So therefore he's not a prophet. But he is a prophet even though he doesn't speak well. This was a character assassination. I mentioned in this book that all the fallacies that we have in the Quran are in the story of Fir'aun, because it's a major story in the Quran. About 20% of the Quran is Qissat Musa and Bani Israel. You know, the Quran, quarter of it is just Bani Israel. And a lot of that is what Fir'aun did. يريد أن يخرجكم من أرضكم فماذا تأمرون. This is our land that he wants us to. You see, that is a fallacy, because it is his land and it is everybody else's land. But he is saying, oh, this nation is ours and the others are not part of us. This is a strategy for murder, for ethnic cleansing, really. When a group wants to kill another group, they start to say that they don't belong here. They are different people. You see, everywhere we have that. And that is a fallacy that the Quran is showing, that Fir'aun is showing. Fir'aun and Haman and Qarun, this trio, is a hujjah for batil, which is, if you wish, the politics and the religion and the economy, kind of like the billionaires and the politicians and the false mashayikh, not the normal mashayikh. So Haman and Fir'aun and Qarun, this is a trio. And you find them arguing bil-batil, arguing for falsehood. And learning that from the Quran would allow you to study well. Now, those 7 elements, al-maqasid, wal-mafahim, wal-fi'at, wal-sunan, wal-qiyam, wal-hujaj, wal-awamir, of course, the last al-awamir, commands. Of course, we look for that in the Quran. We are trained to look for the commands. But we are not trained to look for the maqasid and the concepts and the universal laws and the groups, even though these are very important too. So we need to train ourselves to read those 7 elements. Now, these 7 elements, they might look different, but they are actually not different categories. They are the same, but it depends on what dimension you are looking at. So take, for example, al-adl or qist, justice. Justice is a maqsid and is a concept and is a group, al-muqsitun, and the unjust, al-qasitun. And it's also universal law. قائما بالقسط لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم. And it's also a value. It is a value of beauty, and it's a value of morality, and it's a value of benefit. So when you look at one concept that's called al-qist or al-adl, you will find that the 7 elements, a hujjah, you find that the 7 elements, and it's a command, إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط. So it's a command. So when you look at a ma'na, a meaning in the Quran, you will find that the meaning will fall under the 7 categories. And these 7 categories are just dimensions of looking at the same thing. Why did we divide them this way? So that we facilitate for the researcher to look, because some people are more inclined to look at the objectives, al-maqasid. Some people are more inclined to look at al-mafahim, the concepts. They don't really think about the ends and the goals, but they look at concepts very well. Some people are not into concepts or objectives, but they look at categories. They like to always divide people into, tasnif. And some people look at values. Some people are sensitive to values and less sensitive to objectives or to categories. And that's why those 7 elements could be helpful, because they give you 7 dimensions of the same truth. Al-haq. Al-haq is also a maqsid and a mafhum and a fi'ah. So basically, this chapter, which is now chapter 5 in this book, is detailing those 7 elements, giving you examples. In the footnotes, you will find a lot of references to the Quran. If you want to train yourself to think in terms of those 7 elements and to answer the question, what do I find in the Quran? What do I read in the Quran? What do I look for? I'm reading the Quran, I cannot find what I'm looking for. Maybe perhaps you could start by looking at المقاصد والمفاهيم والفئات والسنن. If you start to look at these elements, then you could start to see perhaps fundamental principles emerging. Let me talk about emergence a little bit. I'm sure that Dr. Adi, شفاك الله دكتور, like I'm sure that Dr. Adi talked about emergence, but basically emergence has to do with connecting elements and thinking about the relationships. That's why there is, in that chapter, there is a long table about the relationships between these 7 elements. When you think about relationships and you try to connect elements of tasawwur, elements of visualization or conceptualization, a new element will emerge. And that emergence is not induction or deduction. This is different. This is a different logic. We're talking here about a different logic. What the Quran calls التولد or النشوء هو أنشأكم من الأرض واستعمركم فيها. Allah emerged you from the earth. التولد is to give birth to something. And that is not Greek logic, and that is not modernist, ala the Russell, etc., the logic that developed in the 17th, 18th century. And that is not postmodernism, obviously, that destroys logic. But Islamic logic is a different logic that depends on the connectivity of the elements and the emerging with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the rizq of Allah and the fath. Allah opens your heart to a higher principle. You see, how did these scholars of Islam come up with these theories of Islam, theories in economics and politics and architecture? How did they come up with a theory? How do you come up with a new idea? It's actually to study elements that are well defined and try to emerge from this study a higher element that was not defined before, a higher principle that could guide you as if you are trying to fulfill all the smaller elements. That is that step number 5. If you go back to the 5 steps, Doctor, with the 5 steps, that is what is called the formative principles. They emerge. They are given birth to, right? And there is a whole movement of higher principles in Islamic thought these days. Take fiqh, for example. I gave examples in this book. There is a whole movement now in fiqh to think in terms of qawa'id, al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, to go at the level of the qawa'id. And from the qawa'id, or al-usul, to go back to al-furu', but not from al-furu' to al-usul. You see, there is a difference between thinking about al-furu', thinking about small questions, and then saying that there is qawa'id, because you are doing istiqra'. Induction. Yeah, you are doing induction and going from the details to the higher principle. There is a difference between that and connecting the details so that a higher principle would emerge, not necessarily by istiqra'. You see, istiqra', you pre-assume something and then you look for it. Al-istiqra' al-naqis or al-istiqra' al-kamil, the incomplete induction and complete induction and Aristotle and all the debate. That you are tastaqri' or tastaqri, to be correct. You are doing this istiqra'. So you do yastaqri. Yastaqri shay'an is to read it in the text. But the emergence is for the text to tell you something new, to put in your rawa', your qalb, your mentality, a new thinking, a new thought. That is an outcome of ijtihad. But the ijtihad, you have to work on the details. You have to work on the elements and try to connect. and try to think and rethink. And you have to be free to think. You cannot think in terms of what they want you to write or in terms of certain preconceived notions. If you are a free thinker and you try to connect all those 7 elements, you might start to see ideas emerging at you, new ideas. They say in Arabic, the ideas will give birth to ideas. Some people try to explain it in terms of the brain, but our reasoning is not in the brain. This is neuroscience stuff. Our reasoning is in the heart. And yes, we have a brain that is a tool, and we describe the brain so far as a network, but this network is not the reality of thought. It's a reflection of what's in the heart. You see, the heart makes a decision, and then the brain talks to the heart. You know, the heart wants to remember something, and then the brain will look into the memory section, which is here, and tell the heart, well, yeah, there's this guy, his name is this. But it's not your brain that thinks, it's your heart. فإنها لا تعمل الأبصار ولكن تعمل القلوب التي في الصدور. It's not your eyes that see, it is your heart that sees. And لهم قلوب لا يفقهون بها. They have hearts by which they don't understand. Understanding is here. الفقه is in your heart. And if you have a good heart, if you have a purified heart, التزكية, you know, التزكية. When you do تزكية, لقد من الله على المؤمنين إذ بعث فيهم رسولا من أنفسهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم. تزكية. That تزكية of the heart purification will make your heart more open to new ideas. Because the Quran, dealing with it is not a mental exercise. Dealing with the Quran is a heart exercise. We call it in English spiritual. It's not really, you know, what do we mean by spirit anyway? ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. هدى المتقين. It is a guidance for the muttaqin, not for the فاسقين. ليست وأما الذين في قلوبهم مرض فزادتهم رجسا إلى رجسهم وماتوا وهم كافرون. Those who have sickness in their heart, they will not understand the Quran, and they will not benefit from the Quran. But the more you work on your heart, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might open new ideas when you read the Quran, because you worked on your heart. Because this Quran is for the believers. You know, وإذا ما أنزلت سورة فمنهم من يقول أيكم زادته هذه إيمانا فأما الذين آمنوا فزادتهم إيمانا وهم يستبشرون. It increases you in iman and it gives you knowledge. But if you have problems with your heart, perhaps you need to work on yourself before you go back and read the Quran. Because the Quran does not open new ideas and new fiqh for people who are fasiqun, people who are not, they don't have tazkiyah. And I know I'm not speaking science here, you know, this is not science at all, because the Quran is higher than science. This is not how science goes, especially, you know, positivist experimental science. We are talking about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens your heart to a new meaning. So you say, you discover something that never discovered before. Is this possible? Yes. The Sahaba knew that. Ali ibn Abi Talib radallahu anhu, karam Allah wajhahu, when they asked him, he said, إِلَّا فَهْمًا أُوتِيهِ رَجُلٌ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. I don't have anything from the Prophet to tell you, but maybe a man will come and understand something from the book of Allah. So Ali ibn Abi Talib is like, you know, one of the top Sahaba in the understanding of the Quran. But he is saying maybe a man will understand. Saying, I don't understand. Maybe someone will come in the future and have fiqh in the Quran that I don't have. Right? And the book, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it in a way that never ends. Every time we look at the Quran in a new era or a new age or a new community, we understand something different. And the tafsir or the ta'wil never ends. The ta'wil is in the qiyamah. يوم يأتي تأويله يقول الذين يسوء من قبل. The full tafsir is in the qiyamah. We will know everything. But nobody should say that we have the full tafsir. Nobody gave a full tafsir. Everybody is, masakin. They are looking at the Quran and saying their opinion and saying their views. But we are all limited. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens something for a servant, He opens out of His mercy, subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His only generosity. And if you have that kind of heart and you're trying to seek fiqh from the Quran will give you. Because it always gives those who ask. But they have to ask properly, and they have to be humble, and they have to read and concentrate, and they have to believe that this is Allah speaking. There is a difference between reading the Quran as a spiritual book and reading the Quran that Allah is talking to me, talking to Muhammad primarily, but then sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, but talking to us as well. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك is Muhammad إليك يا محمد وما أنزل من قبلك, and then all the way until قل أعوذ برب الناس, that's Muhammad too. So it's all talking to Muhammad from after the Fatiha. But when we think about that as it is talking to us, and we try to link the life of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the Quran and the Sunnah at a higher level, with how the Quran is talking to him, perhaps new theories would emerge, new fundamentals would emerge. So I hope we cover those 5 steps, including the 3rd step that has to do with the framework, the step of the critical approach to current literature and reality and so on. We talked a lot about that. How do you criticize? We need to criticize 2 things. We need to criticize ourselves, our current literature and thought, our past. There is no haraj, there is no burden when we criticize an imam from the past. We believe they are imams, we learn from them, but our critique is for the sake of knowledge, for the sake of truth. And no human is free of error anyway. And we also need to critique the other paradigms. We need to enter the other paradigms with a critical thought. So these are just thoughts about chapters 4 and 5 in the book. And I'm sure Akhi Dr. Adi Rahman will continue with you with chapter 6 and the ideas there. And inshallah, I can stop here so we have time for discussion. Jazakumullah.
Professor Jasser Auda for elaborating the whole steps of Maqasid methodology. So he was talking about the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th steps. On the 3rd step, for example, he was talking about the framework that we need to develop as part of the whole methodology, and he was elaborating the 7 elements of the framework that we need to think about, to develop. Steps of the Maqasid methodology, al-manhaj al-maqasidiyah that the professor has been talking about. Now, I think Dr. Addiarahman would like also to add additional points, the step forward. So after elaborating the whole things, then we need to think about how we can go forward after this. So Dr. Adi would talk about this. The time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Insyaallah hendak ngan. Setelah kita menyimak tadi 5 steps dari Maqasid metodologi dan juga di dalam ada frameworks, ada 7 elemen. Nah, bagaimana Maqasid metodologi tadi membentuk ulang studi atau kajian-kajian keislaman ataupun yang lainnya. Oke. Nah, di dalam chapter terakhir itu Maulana Jasser Auda mendiskusikan tentang bagaimana klasifikasi ilmu yang selama ini berkembang, kemudian pengaruhnya terhadap klasifikasi ilmu dalam kajian-kajian keislaman. Harus diakui bahwa pengaruh Aristotle itu sangat berpengaruh sekali terhadap keilmuan keislaman kita. Bahwa keilmuan dibagi menjadi theoretical, practical, and productive. Dan ini kemudian mewujud dalam kajian-kajian keislaman klasik. Dan dampaknya apa? Ilmu hanya tergolong antara teoris, praktis, kemudian yang bagaimana ilmu-ilmu yang berkaitan dengan menghasilkan produk. Ini versi klasik dari Aristotle. Nah, dari warisan Islam ini juga dipengaruhi oleh Aristotle. Al-Farabi membagi ilmu menjadi ilmu bahasa, ilmu logika, ilmu matematika, ilmu alam, teologi, dan ilmu praktis. Walaupun itu diklasifikasi agak detail, tapi prinsipnya masih sangat dipengaruhi oleh Aristotelian. Nah, bagaimana ini nanti juga ternyata akan berpengaruh terhadap bagaimana klasifikasi kontemporer terhadap studi-studi keislaman. Versi lain dari klasifikasi ilmu klasik tidak dipengaruhi Aristotle, tapi secara logikanya mengikuti logika dikotomi, yaitu dari Ibnu Hazm, yang membagi ilmu menjadi nafi' dan madmum. Ini di pendikotomian seperti ini termasuk di situ ilmu sihir. Nah, ini pun Ibnu Khaldun juga menggunakan sedikit banyak juga terpengaruh oleh pembagian ilmu yang seperti ini. Ini Ibnu Khaldun antara akal dan nakli. Kemudian dia membagi ilmu kimia, sihir, geometrik, musik, sedangkan nakli ada ilmu tafsir, hadis, fikih, kalam, sufi, bahasa, dan seterusnya. Nah, ini versi klasik dari klasifikasi keilmuan dalam studi-studi keislaman. Nah, klasifikasi kontemporer, keilmuan bisa dilihat antara sekuler dan Islam. Klasifikasi kontemporer sekuler membagi keilmuan itu menjadi humanity, social science, natural science, kemudian applied science. Sedangkan yang kontemporer dalam konteks Islam dibagi menjadi historical Islamic studies, contemporary Islamic studies in secular academia. Nah, ini kita bisa lihat sendiri di UIN misalnya, pengaruh yang sekuler ini sangat kuat sekali, di mana fakultasnya pun juga berbasiskan pada pembagian ini. Ada fakultas adab disebut dengan humanity, kemudian social science diberdirikanlah science and technology, termasuk di situ natural sciences dan applied science. Nah, ini klasifikasi yang selama ini berkembang. Lalu bagaimana Maqasid metodologi melakukan restructuring terhadap keilmuan Islam? Maka Maulana Jasser Auda membagi keilmuan itu menjadi 4 area. Yang pertama dia sebut dengan usul studies, yang kedua phenomena studies, kemudian disciplinary studies, kemudian strategic studies. Nah, yang menarik adalah bahwa masing-masing klasifikasi ini terdapat intersection dengan yang lainnya. Artinya apa? Pada saat kita melakukan usul studies, kajian-kajian fundamental, itu tidak akan beririsan dengan fenomena, beririsan dengan disciplinary, beririsan dengan strategik. Dia tidak bisa berdiri sendiri seperti itu. Begitu juga seorang yang ingin concern pada isu-isu strategik, itu tidak bisa melepaskan diri pada disiplinerinya, fenomenanya, maupun usul studies. Nah, pembagian klasifikasi ilmu seperti ini juga berdampak terhadap bagaimana ulama itu dipahami. Ada ulama yang dia masuk kategori ulama usul studies, ulama di bidang fenomena studies, ulama di bidang disciplinary studies, ataupun ulama di bidang strategic studies. Mengapa demikian? Karena di awal Maulana Jasser Auda sudah sangat fokus sekali bagaimana Maulana itu ulama itu seolah-olah hanya dipahami orang yang hanya memahami ilmu-ilmu keagamaan. Mereka yang mendalami disciplinary studies seperti ekonomi, politik, sosiologi, antropologi seolah-olah bukan ulama. Begitu juga orang-orang yang strategic studies. Nah, kenapa strategic studies yang menjadi klasifikasi ini juga menarik? Karena Maqasid metodologi salah satu unsur dari logika berpikirnya adalah critical orientation. Nah, dan juga strategic planning. Oleh sebab itu maka strategic studies merupakan bagian yang inherent, yang terintegrasi dalam rangka metodologi Maqasid. Nah, apa saja yang termasuk dalam kajian usul studies? Di situ termasuk fundamental exegesis, usul tafsir, usul hadis, ilmu kalam, usul fikih, dan seterusnya. Nah, ini yang menjawab pertanyaan Bapak Ibu kemarin yang nggak sabaran baru pengantar sudah tanya, usul fikih seperti apa? Ini untuk gimana? Apa yang baru? Nah, ini dia jawabannya. Ya, usul studies, usul fikih masuk pada kategori usul studies. Jadi semuanya keilmuan warisan dari Turos itu terangkum dalam bidang ini, yaitu usul studies. Kemudian disciplinary studies. Jadi disciplinary studies akan banyak sekali pembagiannya. Ini bagaimana nanti kita akan reorientasi spesialisasi akademisi dan profesional modern. Kemudian memfilterisasi elemen-elemen yang tidak sesuai dengan kategori Islam. Kemudian disiplin kontemporer umumnya dipengaruhi oleh motif ekonomis dan materialis. Nah, ini perlu kita sadari, punya kesadaran demikian. Dan disciplinary studies ini dibentuk berdasarkan 7 elemen. Nah, jadi berdasarkan 7 elemen nanti kita akan menemukan banyak unsur-unsur yang itu menjadi disiplin-disiplin keilmuan yang bisa kita kembangkan. Kemudian yang perlu juga menjadi catatan, menghindari pendekatan multidisiplin yang saat ini berkembang. Kenapa dihindari? Karena yang terjadi saat ini kita yang seperti kemarin, kita menggabungkan bermacam paradigma tanpa menyadari bahwa worldview tadi itu berdasarkan tidak bergerak dimulai dari worldview yang sama. Nah, kita ngambil comot aja teori ini tanpa menyadari bahwa teori tadi lahir dari worldview yang berbeda. Nah, ini yang harus diantisipasi. Nah, fenomena studies. Dan ini kalau Bapak Ibu, ini riset yang dilakukan oleh Maulana sendiri di dalam bukunya, bahwa ternyata fenomena studies ketika bisa kita turunkan dari kajian dari 7 elemen tadi. Nah, termasuk di situ misalnya 7 elemen ini berkaitan dengan nikah ya, secara khusus berkaitan dengan nikah. Ini bisa kita kembangkan, mengintegrasikan 7 elemen ke dalam studi fenomena. Kemudian interrelated fenomena, bahwa semua fenomena itu dalam konteks 7 elemen dia saling interrelated. Nah, mulai dari mana? Dimulai dari fenomena global, dan yang perlu juga dipahami bahwa wahyu tidak melihat fenomena berdasarkan disiplin atau spesialisasi, melainkan as it is and as ought to be. Apa yang seharusnya dan apa yang terjadi, seperti itu. Kemudian tentu dari berbagai fenomena ini akan melahirkan fatwa-fatwa yang baru. Kita harus memperbarui lembaga-lembaga fatwa yang terkadang tidak melihat fenomena itu saling terhubung. Misal di Indonesia ada cryptocurrency yang itu ujuk-ujuk udah difatwakan haram seperti itu kan oleh salah satu lembaga fatwa MUI gitu kan. Nah, ini bentuk bagaimana sebuah fenomena tidak dipahami secara utuh. Nah, ini kalau kita lihat misalnya World Risk Report itu sangat complicated sekali bagaimana fenomena berdasarkan World Risk Report. Di situ Islamofobia, modernity, genetic engineering dan seterusnya ini. Ini hal-hal fenomena-fenomena yang berdasarkan 7 elemen itu banyak sekali tidak Islami seperti itu. Nah, yang ini yang harusnya kita harus menghindari. Seperti tadi Maulana Jasser Auda menjelaskan tentang antara problem definition seperti itu dengan purpose definition. Ketika kita bertolak dari problem, yang kita butuhkan kita akan kebingungan sendiri. Tapi kalau kita mulai dengan purpose, maka kita akan menemukan masalah-masalah terhadap bagaimana purpose itu tercapai. Misalnya keadilan dalam pernikahan. Oh, ternyata ada problem di situ yang namanya patriarki. Karena patriarki itu sendiri bukanlah masalah di dalam Islam dan malah tidak dikenal. Tapi dia menjadi hambatan mungkin untuk mewujudkan keadilan. Nah, terakhir berhubungan dengan strategic studies. Studi strategis itu merupakan keniscayaan dari web of thinking di dalam maqasid metodologi. Nah, ada 2 level yang penting. Yang pertama, penelitian dan kajian yang menjelaskan secara terperinci visi dan rencana-rencana besar. Yang kedua, dilaksanakan pada level mikro dan meso, strategi individu, kelompok, organisasi, pemerintahan pada satu bidang atau lebih. Nah, sisi lain adalah dia bersifat kompleks sehingga membutuhkan web of logic, dan yang tak kalah pentingnya adalah ini, bahwa antara fenomena studies, strategic studies, disciplinary studies, fundamental studies itu membutuhkan apa yang disebut oleh beliau sebagai kolektif ijtihad. Nah, kolektif ijtihad itu lahir dari mana? Lahir dari dengan terbentuknya kalau kita nyebutnya Maqasid Research Network. Jadi Maqasid Research Network dan Maqasid Institute memiliki beberapa Maqasid Research Network yang konsen di bidang masing-masing. Ada konsen di bidang AI, ada konsen di bidang ekonomi dan keuangan, ada konsen di bidang tafsir dan seterusnya. Nah, dari masing-masing Maqasid Research Network nanti lahirlah apa yang disebut dengan kolektif ijtihad. Nah, kolektif ijtihad itu yang akan membentuk semacam ekosistem keilmuan sehingga akan mereorientasi disiplin ilmu sesuai dengan worldview Islam. Nah, ini arah dan tujuan kita. Tadi saya tergelitik oleh Pak Apri, Mas Hadi, kenapa nggak dibikin cabang Jogja, cabang Jakarta seperti itu. Nah, saya berharap justru UII akan menjadi leading sektor untuk di Yogyakarta, menjadi pusat studi Maqasid, tentunya di bawah naungan Maqasid Institute. Dan itu akan sangat kontributif sekali dan menjadi tindak lanjut dari kerjasama kita. Kenapa? Mudah-mudahan insya Allah mulai Juni nanti Maulana Jasser Auda akan menjadi visiting professor di UII, dan itu bisa dimanfaatkan bagaimana untuk mengembangkan keilmuan termasuk dalam 4 wilayah ini, yaitu fundamental, disciplinary, fenomena maupun strategic studies. Nah, ini tentunya tidak bisa dikerjakan oleh beliau sendiri. Tidak juga bisa dikerjakan oleh hanya beberapa orang yang ada di Maqasid Institute. Maqasid Institute berharap makin banyak yang bergabung, makin banyak yang mau mewakafkan waktu, pikiran untuk melakukan penelitian bersama. Ini akan menghasilkan ijtihad kolektif dan menjadi arah ke depan bagaimana kita bisa merubah realitas keilmuan pada satu sisi dan realitas peradaban di sisi yang lain. Mungkin itu tambahan dari saya supaya ada sesi untuk diskusi karena kita masih ada 15 menit lagi. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Adi yang sudah menambah ya, melengkapi apa yang disampaikan oleh Prof. Jasser Auda, khususnya terkait kira-kira apa yang akan dikembangkan ke depan berbasis Maqasid metodologi ini, cara kita melihat, mengklasifikasi ilmu dan kajian studi Islam seperti apa tadi disampaikan, intinya berbasis metodologi Maqasid, ada klasifikasi baru yang ditawarkan dalam cara memandang ilmu, juga mendefinisikan ulamanya sekaligus. Jadi ada utama tadi disampaikan, ada usul studies, kajian-kajian fundamental, ada disciplinary studies, kajian-kajian disipliner, ada fenomena studies, kajian-kajian fenomena, dan strategic studies, kajian-kajian strategis. Ini klasifikasi ilmu dan ulama yang ditawarkan oleh Prof. Jasser Auda sebagai hasil dari Maqasid methodology. So thanks Dr. Adi for completing the whole presentation by outlining new classification of knowledge based on the Maqasid methodology. All right, so we still have like 10 to 15 minutes left, so we can have 1 or 2 or maximum 3 questions for Professor Jasser Auda. If okay, I already see Dr. Muhsin would like to raise questions. Any one or Yuzdani? Okay, I think we skip now for 2 questions, so we can start 2 questions here. Sir Muhsin.
I would like to ask about your terminology that I still confused about my understanding that Islamic law from the epistemologically is man not makes law, yeah, but man discover law. In the epistemology of Islamic law, we know that Islamic law is man does not make law, but man discover law. So, yeah. Man does not make law. In the epistemology of Islamic law, man does make law, but man discover law. Discover law. So through ijtihad. So I will make sure about your terminology about the emergent, and also you also mentioned about the induction, and also the term of istiqra. I also understand that Asatibi in Muafakat also use the terminology of the istiqra maknawi, thematic induction. I will make sure about your terminology about the emergent is refer to the term of ta'lil or tafsir maybe. The emergent that you mean. Yeah, and also about the induction, I think this terminology is very philosophical approach in your understanding about the Maqasid. Okay, I think it's enough. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah, well, I tried to answer this question. The difference between the induction and the emergence, really. When you talk induction, you are looking for you are surveying surveying, for example, the Quran for a certain meaning. So Shatibi, in his Muwafaqat, he said that he is going to look for حفظ الدين والنفس والعقل والمال والعرض and الضرورات والحاجيات والتحسينيات by induction. So he is going to, not in the Quran, he said تفاصيل الشريعة. He means fiqh, really. So he made induction over the wealth of fiqh, looking for these. What I'm saying is that he presupposed something like الضرورات and الحاجيات and التحسينيات. And then he is looking at the elements of the Sharia in order to prove his point. They replied to him that this is not yaqini, this is not confirmed, because al-istiqra', Aristotle said, if it is naqis, if it is incomplete, then it does not prove that everything in the Sharia is about darurat, hajat, and tahsiniyat, because you did not study everything in the Sharia. And if you study everything in the Sharia, then it is useless, Aristotle said, because a complete induction is a useless induction, because everything in the Sharia is telling you darurat, hajat, tahsiniyat. What did you prove? Shatibi said that he studied al-istiqra' and he knows that it is not yaqeen, it's not at the highest level of yaqeen versus dhan, qata', but it is aqrabu ila al-qata'. It's closer to qata' or yaqeen or confirmed. Emergence doesn't do logic like that. It doesn't do logic in terms of al-qata' wal-dhan, because al-qata' wal-dhan is, categorizing the qata' and dhanni into two categories is Greek. Al-qata' wal-dhan is Quranic. وإن الظن لا يغني من الحق شيئا واعبد ربك حتى يأتيك اليقين. يقين والظن. But the Quran does not go binary about yaqeen wa shak. In the usul al-fiqh we have qat'i or dhanni only. Shatibi went beyond the usul al-fiqh and said it is not qat'i but is aqrabu ila al-qat'. هم للكفر يومئذ أقرب منهم للإيمان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran is not saying it's only kufr or iman, nothing in between. Of course, Mu'tazila said manzilatun bayna manzilatayn. We're not going to get into Mu'tazila. But really in the Quran, Allah is saying the munafiqun were closer to the kufr than the iman, which means darajat al-kufr wa darajat al-iman. There are levels of kufr and levels of iman, right? The emergence logic does not do that. So there is the Greek logic, and there is a Shatibi who went beyond the Greek logic into what we call today fuzzy logic, really. Like he into more a fuzzy area between the two categories. And the emergence does not classify things like that. An idea that emerges based on the connectivity of the patterns is not a preconceived idea that you are looking for and trying to build an argument, qat'i versus dhanni. But it is rather a fath, an opening that opens to something that yatawallad. It gives birth. The connectivity of the ma'ani gives birth to a new ma'na. But it is not a preconceived ma'na that you are looking for. And it's all human logic anyway. Maybe perhaps the emergence logic is closer to what you could call systems logic, really, that the systems philosophers talk about emergence. I believe that emergence or tawallud is a Quranic concept or an insha. And I looked at the Quran like in really proposing this idea, but it has a similar idea in the systems philosophy, similar to the idea of qat' wa dhann according to usuliyin, and it is Aristotle talking about qat' wa dhann wal istiqra' al-naqis wal kamil. It's not al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. Al-Ghazali built on Aristotle. And al-Shatibi has a different logic. Shatibi is not Greek. Shatibi is beyond Greek, and he's not Ash'ari really, nor Mu'tazili. He is beyond the Ash'ari and the I'tizal. And he really broke ground in this. He was discovered by Muhammad Abdu. Before Muhammad Abdu, Shatibi was forgotten. But I believe that it is time after Al-Andalus and so on, and then after modernism and Muhammad Abdu and Islamic modernism, I believe in the time of postmodernism. Today, we should go beyond postmodernism into a reconstruction of Islamic thought, a reconstruction of our ideas. Because I think that postmodernism is going to work at the end. It will destroy Western civilization, as the postmodernists said from the beginning. They wanted to destroy their civilization, especially after world wars. And they thought that modernism did not save humanity. So they proposed the postmodern ideas. And we live in the postmodern times in terms of the deconstruction of the meaning. If you read Derrida, Derrida is really like very similar to what's happening today. He's a crazy guy, but we live in a crazy time like that. So I believe that going beyond that, we need to rethink our logic and our theories. Allahu A'lam. It's just an idea but I hope I was able to really explain the difference between emergence and induction.
Thank you. And then I think we go directly to Pa Yus for the last question. Dr. Yusdani.
Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for your presentation. It's very, very interesting to me because it is a new horizon for me about the Maqasid philosophy. Yeah, Maqasid philosophy. But I want to know more about, because you stated before about the Muslim scholar Jamaluddin Atiyah in his book, Nahwa Taf'il Maqasid Sharia, that Maqasid Sharia consists of five grades of norms, from Aqidah, Islamic theology, until concrete norm. And the question is, the existence of the theory of Maqasid Sharia, Jamaluddin Atiyah, in your theory, what is the existence of this theory? It is my first question. Second question is, written to Addiarahman in his book, Islamic Modernity and Transformation of Intellectual Tradition, he tried to differentiate between ideal moral and legal specific. I think there are many examples that you have stated before. Where is the existence of this, the theory of Addiarahman about legal specific and ideal moral? And the third, the continued question, I think there is specific book, for example, I think the title is Nazmud Durar Bitanasubil Ayati Wasuar, Umarid al-Biqa'i, and he stated, Amrun ma'kulun idha udidu ala al-uqul talaqatuhu bil qabul. Yeah, I think there are a harmony, the Quran. So I think it is very interesting. So is it the contribution to your theory about the Maqasid philosophy? Yeah, I think it is my comment on. I hopefully to answer my question. This is very, 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 very interesting. And then to Mas Adi, I think in bahasa. Ya, ada usul dari dekan sepuh. Profesor Tamyiz Muharram. Bagaimana kalau Maqasid itu, pusat studi Maqasid itu didirikan di EPI UII. Nah, ini usul konkret ya, usul konkret ya. And so I think to Professor Jasser Auda, is it possible in this university to build the center for Maqasid study in this faculty, the Faculty of Islamic Studies, Islamic University of Indonesia? I think it is enough, my question. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Jazakumullah khairan. And inshallah, I'll try to answer where is Jamaluddin Atiyah? I'm not sure if you find him in the references. I might have missed including him in the references. But we learned from Dr. Jamal, rahimahullah, the expansion of the Maqasid. So the main idea of his book, and I was one of the editors, by the way, in IIIT when we published the translation in English, was the expansion of the idea of Maqasid, as you mentioned, al-aqaid wal-fiqh wa tafsir. So he, rahimahullah, expanded a lot. Where is he in the Maqasid methodology? It's in the expansion of Maqasid al-Quran, that he ended up with 120 something or 140 maqsid in his book, Nahwa Taf'il al-Maqasid. And in the Maqasid methodology, we're saying that they are much more than 140. They don't stop. Every era and every new generation will discover more maqasid and more objectives, because وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. It's only Allah who knows the full range of maqasid. That's about our Ustad, Dr. Jamal. About Dr. Fadl Rahman, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. I read Fadl Rahman. I'm influenced by his ideas, but I did not include him in this particular write-up. But of course, his maqasid of the Quran, like his expansion of the Quranic objectives, had impacted people like me from our generation when we read his books. And at that time, not so many people were talking about the expansion on the Quran itself, how to read and so on. And he's a special kind of modernist. He's not a la Muhammad Abdu or people who did not go beyond the modernist framework. He was a modernist, but he critiqued the modernist framework, and he added a very important level to Islamic scholarship, in my perspective. But I might have also missed him in my references. I have like 500 references or something. I might have missed. And of course, Al-Biqa'i, Nazm al-Durar, في تناسب الآيات والسور, I refer to him all the time. I'm working on a project on the Quran, a project of tafsir actually, and I refer to Al-Biqa'i in his Nazm al-Durar, and especially in the tanasub of the faqarat, the paragraphs. So when I look at the paragraphs, I try to look at the maqasid. In this journey of mine, I look at maqasid al-Quran, from the words to the sentences to the paragraphs to the surah to groups of surah. And I'm now in Surah Yusuf, actually. So during the journey from Al-Baqarah to Hud, I did refer to Al-Biqa'i many times in his tanasub al-ayat wa surah, like why is this ayah after this? Oftentimes, the other mufassirin don't believe in التناسب. Ibn Ashur, for example, he sometimes gets brilliant tanasub, but sometimes he says this is just asbab al-nuzul. It's just because, like in Al Imran, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا الربا أضعافا مضاعفة. He says no, this is just, there is no tanasub between riba and war. This is just asbab al-nuzul. In Al-Biqa'i, he's saying no, riba and war is connected. So you learn from Al-Biqa'i. And of course, Muhammad Abdu said riba and war and Yahud is connected. And Muhammad Abdu was even further. But Al-Biqa'i is a very important source, and in his tafsir is a very important reference. for a Maqasidi understanding of the Quran. Can we have an institute of studying Maqasid in here? Of course, yeah. Please propose something and we work on it. And I'm honored, yani, I'm invited to come and teach and participate. And inshallah, we'll collaborate on good projects, inshallah. Every time I'm in the region, I will come and spend time. And inshallah, we can work on that. I see, mashallah, from all the discussions that there is a good reception of this idea and critiquing it. And I see that we can move forward with these ideas and this research. I'm more than happy to participate, inshallah, supervise some of your students, collaborate on projects as much as my time allows. I'm mostly busy with writing these days, much less with lecturing or participating in public events. So, but inshallah, I could take from the writing time to contribute, inshallah, to anything that you find useful, inshallah. Barakallahu feek, Doctor. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you. Dr. Adi?
Dijawab sebenarnya. Itu udah dijawab. Kalau ibarat tangga itu udah tangga untuk nurun aja lah gitu. Nah, langkahnya langkah menurun itu. Jadi tinggal tergantung VAI-nya lagi kan dieksekusinya mau 3-5 bulan lagi atau bulan besok sudah ada kan gitu. Nah, kalau banyak tunggu-tunggunya berarti 5 bulan lagi gitu kan. Tapi kalau memang langsung set, nah insya Allah bulan besok sudah ada. Itu. Kenapa? Karena dulu seperti itu waktu tanda tangan MOU, saya kan agak sedikit gila aja ngomongnya. 6 bulan kalau nggak ada tindak lanjut, MOU-nya kita cut. Kan seperti itu kemarin Pak Bu Anies. Alhamdulillah Bu Aniesnya gercep. Maknanya terus kapan bisa direalisasikan. Dan itu menjadi target kita. Kenapa? Karena kita yang diinginkan itu adalah keseriusan. Kalau hanya sebatas formalitas surat, apa gunanya? Kan kayak gitu. Nah, mudah-mudahan insya Allah bisa kita follow up lebih lanjut kerjasamanya. Dan kalau udah Yai Tamyiz yang ngomong, nah, saya nggak bisa ngomong apa-apa lagi. Harus diwujudkan. Ya Yai.
All right, Bapak Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, covered of the book today in this methodology. We talk about the framework comprised of 7 elements and how we envision Islamic studies via or based on Maqasid methodology. So I think it's been a very and stimulating and conversation that we have today. So I invite everyone to join me in thanking our Professor Dr. Adi very, very much for taking the time to be here with us, sharing his vast knowledge and we find them very, very useful. Thank you very much, Professor Jasser, Auda, and Dr. Adi. So, for both our speakers. This note, now we can end our session. So, thank you very much for all participants, all lecturers who have been very enthusiastic, attending and participating actively in this session. Thank you very much. And good news is, as Dr. Adi has mentioned before, our Professor Jasser Auda, will be coming back to our university around June, as a visiting professor. So, inshallah, we'll have more time to have more intellectual discussion and conversation with him, inshallah, in few months to come. So, thank you very much for that plan as well. So, that's all for now. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Dan yang spesial lagi ya Pak, biasanya sertifikat tuh kalau beliau tuh tanda tangannya cuma PDF, cuma gambar. Hari ini sertifikat untuk UI itu langsung beliau tanda tangani langsung. Iya, itu nanti dialog.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Supriyanto Abdi, for guiding these sessions, and also thank you very, very much to our speakers, Professor Dr. Jasser Auda and Dr. Addiarahman, and also thank you very much to the audiences for attending this event since the first day, and now the second day, Alhamdulillah. Both first day and second days, our lecture series had been run well. And yeah, let's close this great event by reciting Hamdalah together. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. And Professor and Dr. Addiarahman, maybe there is a little souvenir from us. So please stand in front. And Dr. Anissa. We have some batik, yes, and a little souvenir from our faculty. Okay, the next one is from Dr. Addiarahman. More applause, more applause.